What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Stumbling my way through that. I'm here tonight with Dr. Richard Carrier, and Carrier has put out a new book called The Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus. And so, Carrier, why don't you first, in case anybody here doesn't know who you are or where they can find you or anything, why don't you sort of show yourself, tell people who you are, where they can find you, and all that, and then, oh no,
What's wrong?
We lost Carrier for a second. There he is.
All right. Did that fuck up your recording, or are we good?
No, you're fine.
All right. Yeah, I just accidentally bumped something, and it just.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so sorry about that. Hello, everybody.
No,
No, the apocalypse. Atlanta didn't get nuked. We're okay. So. Yeah, who am I? So Richard Carrier. So you can find everything about me at richardcarrier.info. So that's my website. All my social media links are there. The classes I teach online, if you're interested, are there. All my books and my blog and all of that stuff. Anything you want to know about me is all housed through that site. PhD in ancient intellectual history of the Roman Empire in particular from Columbia University. But I have two tracks. I've been doing philosophy, contemporary peer-reviewed philosophy, and blogging philosophy, as well as ancient history, lots of subjects. So I've done ancient science, but also resurrection apologetics, and also, of course, the historicity of Jesus. So I basically had a crowd-funded postdoc research grant to do a formal peer-reviewed study on this question, and that was published back in 2014. Actually resulted in several books, peer-reviewed books, but or articles, books and articles. But the big one is on the historicity of Jesus, and that came out in 2014, published by Sheffield Phoenix, a respectable biblical studies press. And then 10 years later, I sort of realized I needed a sequel volume to say what's all happened in the last 10 years. And so that's the new book, which is Obsolete Paradigm of a Historical Jesus. And I'm hearing that people are finding it like a decent introduction. So even if you haven't read on the historicity of Jesus, you can kind of find your way in on the Obsolete Paradigm. But it is mainly designed to cover what's happened since. So it's the last 10 years. And that involves two things. One is how has academia responded to the original study, which is mostly to ignore it, and then if they don't ignore it, lie about it. So, which is, it's important to talk about that because that's all that's happened in the last 10 years. There's never been a real serious rebuttal to it, or even a contrary offer. There's no peer-reviewed monograph defending the historicity of Jesus against my findings. And my findings were corroborated, but also under peer review by Raphael Ataster for Brill, which is a major international academic press. So we've got two peer-reviewed studies arguing it's doubtful that Jesus really existed, and we have zero peer-reviewed studies arguing the contrary. We just have apologetics responses and things like that. So yeah, talk about that in the book. But the other side of it is that there's been a lot of movement and a lot of other topics related to this. Scholarship has moved more and more in my direction on a lot of things, including getting away from oral lore theory. The field is still obsessed with oral lore theory, but a lot of scholars now are coming out arguing that no, these are literary productions. They did not rely on oral lore or anything like that. And and so there's a lot of that kind of stuff, and then there's various other things too, like the dying and rising God thing. Tons of studies have completely blasted away Jonathan Z. Smith on that. So now the mainstream consensus, if you judge by all the publications in the last 20 years, are on my side on this. Yes, dying and rising gods were a trend, definitely a trend. Christianity is kind of like the last one that's a latecomer to the game, really. And so there's been a lot of studies like that have come out. And there's others, even the Brothers of the Lord stuff. There are scholars who publish things that are supporting my position on that, even if they don't take my position on that. And so there's lots happened in the last 10 years, even that's by people that aren't necessarily mythicists, but are moving the ball down the field on a lot of topics that are really important and relevant to the historicity question. And so I cover that as well. And one of the big ones is Docetism. Maybe we'll get into that later if people want to know what that is and why it's a big deal. That's a big thing that happened in the last 10 years is scholars are now realizing that Docetism didn't exist. And if that's the case, all of the texts that were misinterpreted as Docetist can actually look like mythicist texts that or attacks on mythicist Christians. And so this actually becomes evidence for the existence of mythicism as an actual sect in the 2nd century. So that's kind of important and is definitely needs to be dealt with and looked at. So that's another thing that's in the book. And also I do other things like my realization in the last 10 years of teaching things, learning like what's necessary to teach the mathematical understanding of the method that I use, that all historians should be using in one way or another. So I have a chapter dedicated to like better explaining the math for both level of readers, like introductory and advanced. So there's like sections that introductory people could skip, but the advanced readers will be glad are there, where I'm talking about some of the more detailed mathematical stuff. But mostly it's introductory to try and get people back up to speed. And then I do a lot more applications. So like a lot of people ask, like, could you show this applied to other questions besides the historicity of Jesus? And I said, that's a good idea. And so I do that a lot. So I first of all, I apply it to the historicity of other people who, like Socrates, for example, and I apply it to analyzing the historicity of specific stories in the Gospels, which don't require denying Jesus existed, because mainstream scholars already agree most of those stories are bogus. But how do you tell the difference? How do you know a story has historical material in it or not? Well, that's the same method, and I show how to use it, and so on. So there's a lot in here that's really moving the ball down the field, and consequently touches on all angles of it, I think. And so it really focuses on things that have changed or that were challenged, and doesn't spend a lot of time on things that no one disputed from the original book.
Yeah, that's a great overview of the entire book. I do have specific questions about nearly every part of the book. But I guess just so I can get kind of like a soundbite from you, would you say that the consensus of New Testament scholarship has moved more towards the mythicist hypothesis or farther away? Specifically, the minimal mythicist hypothesis.
I would say it's largely unchanged statistically. One thing that has happened is like there were about 6 qualified, like PhD level in a relevant field scholars who were either mythicists or agnostics, right? Who are willing to admit that, or even like scholars who think mythicism is plausible. And I don't mean like jokingly, mockingly plausible, but no, I mean like they sincerely think, yeah, it's actually possible. It was like 6 of us when I published, or at least by the time Latastra published. But since then, it's about over 40. So there are a lot of scholars who are like moving in my direction. But if you think let's say there's 1,000 scholars, 40 out of 1,000 is not, going to change the field. But it might eventually. This might be the beginning, like 10 years from now. Yet you might see this being taken more seriously at academia. And I think largely, if you see the new blood coming in, it's the younger scholars usually. There are a lot of older scholars who definitely, like, once they're retired and they're allowed to say that they actually think it's plausible, you see a lot of retired scholars doing that. But also it's a lot of young guns, people who are new and relatively new in this. And I think as we get more younger scholars getting in and replacing the old guard, I think there's going to be more and more acceptance of this, at least as one plausible theory of the ones that are usually debated. So rather than rejected as like something fringe that shouldn't even be considered, right? That's the tack that a lot of like apologists are taking.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I find it weird that, the consensus hasn't like at least shifted a little bit, considering all of the advancements that you talk about in the book here. What do you think the disconnect is there with, between the evidence and the minimal mythicist hypothesis?
Well, they're not paying attention, right? So the usual tack on this is to simply refuse to read my book or Lataster's, just not deal with it. It's a third rail. It's too dangerous to talk about. It creates too much annoyances, emotional labor on their side. So the pose is generally just to ignore it. And then if someone gets asked, why do you believe in the historicity of Jesus? They're on the spot and come up with some armchair answer that's kind of silly. And so I have a whole chapter on these kind of armchair, sudden, deer in headlight answers to this question. where I show that like these are not really strong reasons and shouldn't be the ones resorted to. So I think it's mostly just assiduous avoidance, and I think even the people who try to engage, most of them, there are a few exceptions, but most of them are actually trying to discourage their peers from reading the study. So they're like trying to sequester it, censor it, or to like claim that it's all bullshit and not worth their time. Basically lying about the content of what's in there. And that's the thing I specifically show examples of and talk about in chapter 3 of this book. That's actually been a strategy to try and make this go away. And I think that works on mostly the Christian side. And the secular side is mostly just avoiding the question altogether. And that's why you get this thing where it's young scholars or retirees who are willing to like openly do this, but they have to actually know about it first, right? So a classic example is Megget. I think it was Megget did a chapter. There was a book I can't remember the title. It just came out, like revamping or reconsidering the historical quest for Jesus or something like that. It's not the exact title, but it not once ever discusses the historicity of Jesus. It barely discusses historical facts about Jesus, and mostly just says, well, we can't really know any facts about Jesus, so let's talk about what the culture was like when he lived. Let's talk about how literature worked. And so it's like almost sort of de facto admitting there's no good evidence for Jesus, and so we got to talk about something else. But they never talk about it just presumes historicity throughout. And Megget has like one sentence in there where he mentions that maybe there's someone out there. He wrote a whole article about me, so I know he knows who he's talking about. But he just says, yeah, there's some people out there doing this. But he doesn't even name me. He doesn't name Lataster. He doesn't cite the studies. He doesn't tell anybody anything about them, and implies that they're like not worth reading. He doesn't say that, but he implies it. So it's kind of like literally avoiding this, right? He cites his own article on it, but if it was published ages ago. But but yeah, it just seems like even he wants to avoid talking about as much as possible, and doesn't want his peers to talk about it, right? Like he's like, let's just pretend this doesn't exist, skip over it really quickly, and then just move on and keep pretending Jesus existed and we're sure of it, right? And so that's kind of like a very typical answer to your question. It's like, why is academia so juggernauty about this? Like, why are they just institutional inertia and unmoved? It's mostly because they're just ignoring it and want it to go away rather than engaging with it.
Do you think that it's going to, like you mentioned earlier about how as new blood gets into like the New Testament scholarship scene, do you think that that's like, as soon as we see the old, I guess the old paradigm moving out and this new set coming in, do you think that they'll kind of lean with this this new paradigm that you're presenting like in the book here?
It's hard to say. It depends on who wins the ideological war rather than the factual war, right? What I had predicted was that, like today, you have a whole bunch of historicist theories, and they're all taken equally plausible. Like, oh, there's the zealot hypothesis and the prophet hypothesis and the sage hypothesis and the apocalyptic prophet. There's different kinds of models of the historical Jesus, and everybody's taking them seriously. I think the non-existence hypothesis would be included in those things as one of the things that you could take seriously and explore and write about. I think what will happen is it'll be possible to write about it without being like blocked through peer review because they don't like the content, or being punished by your dissertation advisor for exploring it, or the kinds of levers of pressure that are existing now, I think will fade over time, and people will stop taking them seriously. I think they'll be braver and don't really care about like, oh, you're gonna burn my rep. I don't think you're gonna succeed at that. I'm just gonna fucking write what I want. I think that's gonna happen more often. And I think if you look like what's trending, like what happened to the Q hypothesis, right? It's where the mainstream consensus hasn't gotten rid of Q yet, but the idea that there was no Q is so accepted that pretty much it's standard now to say, well, we're not sure whether Q existed or not. And then the scholar has to say, well, I think it did, and I'm going to go on this, but here's some respectable arguments against it. I think that's where we'll be, where it'll be like, yeah, I'm convinced Jesus existed, but here's some studies if it's, and possibly what didn't, and here's some studies about that, and so on. So I think we'll get to that point where it's just a respectable example among many, and largely that's because most of the field is Christian apologists, not like objective scholars, right? The and even most of the objective scholars, if not all of them, are ex-Christian apologists who are definitely nestled into the Christian economy, right? So, so it's definitely an ideologically captured field. So it's not going to behave the way any other field would, like ancient science or ancient economics, which I've written about consensus change in those fields. I've blogged about that. Even that took a long time, but not as long as I think it'll take for this. I think it'll be a while before and if it ever becomes like the consensus. I don't know if biblical studies will have enough free thinkers in it to even allow that to happen. But who knows? I have no idea. But where I think I see it going is in that direction. Where it should go is what happened to Moses, right? Like the Moses and the patriarchs, pretty much everybody admits that that's the mainstream consensus, that they're mythical and the stories are made up about them. And I think that was easier to get rid of because Christians were not so dependent on the historicity of Moses and the patriarchs. Like it gets you in trouble if you're like in the Zionist sphere, and like, you know, the Israeli Zionist camp doesn't like the idea, but even most Jewish scholars agree with it, right? So so like they've kind of lost that argument. That's kind of like an isolated fringe political opposition that it hasn't completely captured the field. And so, but I think here, like denying the historicity of Jesus is just too dangerous, I guess. I don't personally think it logically is dangerous to Christianity, but it is dangerous to evangelical Christianity, which absolutely depends on a historical Jesus. Like Christianity itself could go back to the original teachings of Paul and have a celestial Jesus that the Gospels allegorize, and that would be like super useful to them. So I think Christianity itself is not under threat, but conservative Christianity is under threat. And you know how they're circling their wagons on all attacks now, like the culture war, they're being persecuted, etc. So like they've gotten more hardline on a lot of things than they were like 20 years ago, because the evangelicals are shrinking, they're hemorrhaging youth, so they're losing population in the U.S. or in the first world for sure. But so anyway, so this political dynamic is going to really be the wild card here in deciding what actually happens in the field. But what I predict is a sort of middle of the road thing where it will become an accepted position, but not everybody agrees with it position.
Okay. I do want to emphasize that we will be answering all Super Chat questions. So if you want to send in a Super Chat, we will be handling those questions near the end of the show. We do encourage doing the Super Chats, for the show here. And I know Carrier loves answering questions, so please send in those Super Chats.
And we can also just throw those in as they come up, right? Like we don't have to wait to the end, do we? Like we can intersperse.
No, yeah. We could definitely do that. One thing that I do, it's not a Super Chat, but there is a question of when will the audiobook be out? And that largely depends on me, just letting everybody know, because we're currently about midways through recording the audiobook, and I'm about halfway through what we've got recorded, edited up. And so I'm working as fast as I can on getting it edited. So hopefully we can get that done sometime in the first of 2026. Ideally, we were going to have it done like when it was supposed to come out in November, but we got forced back into the office and everything like that.
So much stuff happened.
Complicated. Right? Yeah. But I will say that if you can't wait, for the audiobook, there is Jesus from Outer Space that is already in audiobook form. If you want to listen to that, it's on Audible right now. Casey, a lovely wife, voices it, reads it to you. It apparently it's got a lot of great feedback on it, right, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody who's talked to me about it says they love it. So, yeah, good work, Casey.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work. I mean, I read all of my other books before that, and I know how hard it is. So it's a challenge, not just like as a labor, but it's a challenge to like make it enjoyable to listen to, right? Because you gotta not do the wooden reading and stuff like that. And I mean, Casey really does a really good job of that. So that's kind of what you want in a narrator.
Yes, definitely. She's a great narrator. And then we've got it's a Rubik's saying, I feel like I just saw you 2.5 weeks ago.
They did. They did,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm
So
still sitting on an email they sent to look at this crazy book. So, I mean, this is a bit off topic, but what we're referring to for people who don't know, um, I went to what was functionally a Christian nationalist conference a couple weeks ago. It was a modern day debate, DebateCon 6. It was basically uh, like hardcore right wing stuff. And I did 2 debates, but there were a bunch of other debates. There were other liberals who showed up. Not a lot of us. Like we had a small cadre. Um, and they were part of the camp who kept me sane while we were there talking about things like that. But there's a book by one of the debaters who who's anti-feminist, right? So Andrew
yeah,
Wilson's wife, right? And so I've been told that that's shall we say interesting. So so I've got an annotated version that I can look at, and just got to find time to look at it. Um, I am going to write about that debate. I have like one particular point I'm going to make. I'm going to do a whole article about that one point. It's going to be more fun than deep, but but that'll be like this or next week that will drop.
cool. Now, to continue, in David Fitzgerald's book, Jesus Mything in Action, in the first volume of it, he mentions how he kind of did sort of a rudimentary study on how many of the degree granting institutions in the field of New Testament studies requires like, faith statements and, just strict adherence to a dogmatic view of Christianity. Do you think that is a significant contributor to the, I guess the phobia that the field seems to have against the minimal mythicist hypothesis?
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. So there's a lot of scholars who aren't in those institutions, but are still under similar social pressures. Because what we're talking about is, I think it was like 1 in 3. It might have been more. I can't remember how many he found, but
Yeah.
where these faculty, so these are PhDs, these are authors you might think are like free academics or whatever, are under contractual obligation to never deny certain things. Like, so basically they're under like Damocles sword, right? Like you couldn't even acknowledge that doubting historicity was plausible. You have to defend the faith and the literal Bible and all that stuff, or you'll get fired. And even if you don't, if you have that violation, well, that's just, that's on your record, and they can like just, if someone wants to get rid of you, like they can use it. They can use that as the excuse, right? As soon as it's like, it's like the drug war. Like they know everybody's going to be doing drugs, but they allow this so they can pick and choose who they're going to prosecute. So it becomes kind of like a way to police brown people, right? Like, so you just, white person with drugs, you can kind of look the other way more often, right? Like because it's discretionary, it becomes a sort of excuse to allow you to police people you don't like. And so I think you'll have that kind of problem where people might be ignoring the contract they're under, but it's just a matter of time before they piss someone off and they use it against them, right, and get them knocked or whatever. But anyway, so yeah, there are people under that, but I think most scholars are either Christian apologists who are free of that, but they still have social pressure around them, or their own personal faith belief is policing themselves, right? And then you have the secular and a few Jewish scholars that I think what's more important is them, right? Because they usually are able to move on things before Christians can, oftentimes. And if you look at the history of changes in consensus in biblical studies, and I think them, because they're like inside the economic social network, like grant money, students, attitudes from their faculty, support at conferences, and and just the accolades of their peers, right? Like, so basically, you don't want to be a persona non grata. You don't want to piss off a bunch of people who could affect you, it's through soft power or anything like that, or who could just make your life miserable by harassing you over it and like trying to like sit you down and tell you that you're wrong and you it's dangerous and you shouldn't be doing this. And these kind of people will just avoid this. And I've talked to people privately about this, like scholars in the field who've told me this. Like they fear this, right? They fear like it making trouble for them, even though if the trouble's not like they're not being shot or can't be fired or whatever. Like that's not the trouble. It's vexatious. So it's just easier to avoid it right? And so and you can tell when a scholar is evasive rather than adamant. So like some scholars, you ask them about this and they're like, mythicism is ridiculous, right? And then they're like, it's absolutely certain that Jesus existed. You know where they are and you know why they're there. But then you get to people who are just kind of like wishy-washy about it and just don't want to make a committal statement about it and like kind of give a reason why they're a historicist, but are not like they're not that adamant about it, right? Like those are the people that are just trying to avoid all the trouble, the bother. Call it the bother. Just want to avoid the bother. Like they have enough bother they have to deal with the things that they're already doing. They don't need more shit coming down on them that they have to deal with. So it's just easier to keep your head down, right? Basically, so I think there's a lot of that kind of panopticon effect that the Christians kind of have influence over the seculars in a way that people don't expect. It's not a direct way. It's not like they actually control them, but it's a social influence, a peer pressure kind of environment. And I think that's especially because it's so collegial. There's a lot of like elbow rubbing and backroom stuff, and getting the nice conferences, funded by your university, so you get free trips, and so it's a lot of things that matter that are small levers of power that can be used like this, and I think that's kind of what's going on a lot.
Yeah. Now, I have to say, I think that probably one of the still most cited things is that, oh, well, the consensus says this, so why are we even talking about this? Do you still get those kinds of questions or statements, rather, pushback against like minimal mythicism? And if so, like, how do you generally respond whenever somebody says that?
Yeah, I don't really get that anymore from academia. So I think academics, at least academics who know what know anything about what they're talking about. So there's some academics that haven't even read the book, don't even know what's in it. Like they might just use the flippant consensus argument. But any scholar who knows anything about the arguments we've made, they won't make that argument because they know we passed peer review twice. They know our arguments aren't really out there, right? Like, so our arguments actually are more respectable than they're willing to admit. So they don't usually use the consensus argument because that, especially since you can use that against them, because if you're just citing the consensus to not listen to or, to pay attention to a challenge to that consensus, then you're basically advertising that the consensus is just a dogma. Like there's no way to challenge it, right? So like if you're just going to automatically exclude any study that challenges the consensus can never change even when it's wrong. And I think a lot of scholars now are starting to get that. They're realizing they can't make that argument because that makes them look bad. Because then it really gives away the game. Because you're basically just saying it's a dogma, and right. So like you can deny it all you want, but you just basically described it as a dogma. So they don't want to do that. Where I get the consensus argument is from outsiders, so amateurs who aren't familiar with the field at all, and so they just say, "Well, consensus, right?" And which is literally what I did, right? Like before I was a mythicist, I used to say exactly that. I was with the consensus. This is ridiculous. These arguments are ridiculous. Now, at least I would engage with them. And they were usually ridiculous because these were the internet, the crazy stuff, the Acaria S and all of that. At will and all of these crazies. But until I read Doherty, and then I started to get, this is actually a serious argument. And like for all its faults, it's not that bad. And so that then, I got the crowdfunded support to do the postdoc program, and I basically started pulling at all the threads and realized that's how I changed. But I used to do the same thing. I used to say, yeah, the consensus. I don't know how you're going to argue against the consensus. But then when I would check to see, is the consensus well-formed or is it malformed? And I found it's malformed. It's not a well-founded consensus. The consensus is more ideological and sort of inertial. It's not really based on good arguments. And you can tell this when you look at like Shirley Jackson Case's book, roughly 1920, the last peer-reviewed book defending historicity itself. And that's 100 years ago. And you look at what that case that is in, ironically, Case's book, even a modern scholar can agree that that's a terrible case. So it's like, oh, this is bad. Right? It's like this, like we've already rejected half the premises that this guy is relying on, right? So like, so much has changed, but I think that created the inertia that people just keep relying on that as like, they might even mention Case, right? They're just relying on that because they haven't read it, they haven't checked to say, oh, these are bad arguments, I shouldn't be citing this anymore. It's very similar to the dying and rising God thing that happened, where everybody was citing Jonathan Z. Smith. Oh, he proved it, the consensus, he proved it. He disproved it, right? He disproved the dying and rising God thing, and it's the consensus now, yada yada. Until like a bunch of scholars started to like question the emperor's clothes, and then now we've got like 10 studies coming out saying nope, Smith was wildly wrong, and so they're just, it's smoke now, right? Like, so that consensus is gone. And so that changed fast, right? I think, well, maybe depending on where you start the clock, but if you go from Jonathan Z. Smith to the change, like that was maybe 10 to 20 years it took, right? For the complete flip of the field on that. And then still there are a lot of old timers who don't know that the literature is completely gone the other way. And so they'll still cite Jonathan Z. Smith's like 1995 book or whatever, what year it was. And it's like, dude, that's been wildly refuted by 10 different studies now. It's super obsolete. And so it becomes down to the question of who's actually checking the literature in their field, and who isn't, right? So a lot of people will just keep citing Smith, not realizing that there were all these challenges to that consensus that he tried to build. And those challenges have survived. Like now there's 10 of them, and there's no defenses. Like no one's defending Smith anymore, right? So, if you don't know that's happened, if you haven't been watching the field, if you just keep citing Smith, not realizing all of this, that makes you look bad too, because then you can say like, dude, you're so out of it. You got to pay attention to the literature of your own field, man. Like it's changed. And there are a lot of things like this where people aren't checking, even scholars in the field aren't checking things before. They're relying on what they were told in grad school or something, and they aren't checking the latest literature to see like, oh, do we still believe that? Is that what we're still saying now? And I think that's kind of a problem throughout the field for a lot of things, like even the Q thing. Like I think there's a lot of people will defend Q on the consensus and like barely even know Goodacre's name, right? And couldn't name another person who's published against Q and so on. And so like that happens a lot. People just rely on these institutional inertias that were created decades ago and aren't going back and checking and aren't rethinking it and saying, actually maybe that consensus was wrong. And what are they saying now? Wow, there's a lot of people challenging it. These challenges are pretty good. Wow, that consensus was not well formed. I shouldn't have been citing it even then, much less now. And so that happens with a lot of these subjects, and we see it happening all the time. So it would not be out of character for it to happen on this at some point. It's just a question of how much emotional resistance is there rather than rational.
Yeah. And so I'm sorry, I'm thinking of things kind of on the fly. What would you say as far as in your survey of the field, 10 years after OHJ, what has done the most damage to the historicity claim, as far as like showing that it's the least likely option?
Yeah. So sort of a theme of the book is the utter stalwart failure to even attempt to respond to the argument, right? So like if you look at like what the critics do, where they lie about what's in the book, or they make arguments then don't tell you that those arguments are refuted in the book, and they don't tell you if they have any rebuttal to those refutations, the things they leave out, the things they don't tell you, like the way they manipulate the evidence to make it go away. So like if you're doing something like, for example, if you're straw manning an argument, that's actually avoiding the argument. So like if you straw man an argument, you have not responded to the argument, right? You've avoided responding to the argument. You're using the straw man as an excuse to make it look like you've responded to the argument, but you didn't. You responded to some other argument that doesn't exist in the book. And therefore you've left the actual argument in the book unanswered, right? So these strategies are what's happening or were happening with the critics, right? The academic critics I'm talking about here, not just amateurs on the internet. I mean like the serious scholars who should know better, right? The fact that that's all for 10 years, 10 fucking years, that's all they've got, right? They've published no peer-reviewed answer to like a comprehensive study arguing the opposite case. They can't respond to the arguments in the book, so they respond to arguments that aren't in the book and claim that they're responding to the arguments in the book. The fact that they're avoiding what's in the book and can't refute it, and then the arguments that they come up with on the side are so terrible. like this shows you that's to me is kind of like the decisive proof that we're right? Like this, like, clearly, like if we were wrong, they should have blown us away by now, right? Like there should have been like serious, honest critiques that were actually pretty effective. Instead, they're completely avoiding the actual content of the studies. And that tells me after 10 years, they've had 10 years at bat, they can't come up with a refutation. That to me is the strongest evidence that we're right. It doesn't affect the probability of the original study. I think that, my tolerances are pretty much the same, slightly narrower now. I think I talk about this in the book where there are some results from Camille Gregor and others that narrowed my margins of error, but still within the tolerances of the original study. That hasn't changed, but my confidence in the result is definitely at that.
Okay. Yeah. No. And then, was there anything that has changed in the last 10 years, as far as, moving closer towards, mythicism or at least validating the mythicist hypothesis? What would you say has done the most heavy lifting in that area to like establish it as a viable option?
Yeah, so what's happened really is shoring up the background evidence. And I think so, like in terms of the original analysis, that really shouldn't matter. The background evidence was already pretty well established. And so there were a lot of denials or resistance, like people who wanted that background evidence to go away, right? And because they saw that it made it plausible. Now, once you admit that it's plausible, like you get the results that my original study had. So there's not been anything that's come out that's increased, or yeah, that's increased the probability of mythicism. Like nothing has made it more likely. Even the Docetism stuff, because that's 2nd century, so we cannot establish whether the mythicist Christians being attacked are a new sect or the original sect. We can't tell. So we can't use that to argue one way or the other for the historicity of Jesus. But it does prove that there were deniers of Jesus. And so one of the emotional resistance arguments is, well, we should have evidence of these people, right? There should be references to these mythicist Christians. Now, really, that's not true because the record is so curated by historicists that we have no reason to expect survival of anyone who would doubt this or deny it. We're not going to hear from them, right? They're going to be completely shut out of the preservation of records. So we don't actually expect that. But if that's your emotional barrier, if that's the block, the thing that's preventing you from accepting the facts is, well, I'm just so sure that there should be evidence of that. Like, I mean, that's wrong. But if that's the thing holding you back, we can remove that barrier now because the evidence suggests we've got a lot of evidence actually that there were mythicist Christians. We've got Christians talking about them, condemning them, like, in the worst terms, they're super immoral. Don't talk to them. They're terrible. And so we've got discussions of this. And so we actually have that. So the thing is, it's more of a psychological gain. So all of the scholars that have gone on to admit this, that not only that the Docetism thing is made up, a modern myth, the ancient evidence needs to be reinterpreted. Some of them also go as far as like saying things almost in the direction of me, but not outright. But similar, I talk about what they say, and it's getting closer to where I am on this. But just the fact that they've gotten there, right, has changed the game. But I think it doesn't change the actual original estimates of probability that I reached at in the original study, but it can remove psychological barriers. If you've got these emotional barriers that you needed something to do this. And I've run into a lot of people when I published the original study who had emotional barriers that were removed by the background evidence of the original study, where they said, I didn't know that was the case. And now that I know that's the case, well, now mythicism is super plausible. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly my argument. So I had a lot of people like that. So I know these psych barriers are there. And so it's helpful to remove them, but it doesn't really change the actual results because the results were not encumbered by those psychological barriers. They were completely like objective, right? And so really when you get through those psychological barriers, you're just getting closer to what was already objectively the case, 10 years ago. But if it helps you get there, I'm all for it. As long as it's telling the truth, right? As long as it's true. So there's a lot of useful things in it like that. So if you had these little like things that were stopping you, if the dying and rising gods thing was stopping you, even though I didn't use that as evidence against historicity of Jesus, if that was your block, well, we've got a great removal for you, right? And the brothers of the Lord thing, We've got 10 studies that are agreeing with me that all Christians, all baptized Christians, were brothers of the Lord. It's like that's happened in the last 10 years. Like the whole field has moved in that direction, but won't go the extra step and say, oh, well, then that means that that means we don't know if First Corinthians 9 or Galatians 1 are talking about biological brothers, because the only brothers Paul talks about, brothers of the Lord, are these baptized Christians or cultic brothers. They don't go that extra step, but they shore up all the rest, right? Which I had already done, right, pretty thoroughly originally. But if you're thinking like you're just emotionally resistant to all the evidence I presented of that, and you say that can't be grammar or whatever dumb argument you've got, right? Well, you're wrong. Now we've got 10 different independent studies that are agreeing with me on this fundamental premise. And once you accept the premise, which you should have accepted 10 years ago, but once you accept the premise, the rest follows, right? Like if you're willing to follow where the evidence goes, that's where the evidence goes, really. And so I think, yeah, if the one barrier to you accepting historicity was I need 10 different scholars under peer review supporting this premise, right? It's like, well, I got it. We've got it. It happened in the last 10 years. We have it. And so I've cited, it's all cited in the book. You can get it all there. I quote some of it and talk about it. So yeah, right. So things like that, I think it's mostly removing psych barriers. But the one thing that I think has like materially changed, this is the thing that actually changed my results. And so I have a new appendix in this book where I redo the math. And it was the Camille Gregor studies. So they did a couple studies. He had ran some teams that tried to argue that there should be a lot more people in my reference class for mythical people, right? Who are historical. So you could radically change the prior probability. Now, they committed a fundamental mistake that was warned against in the original study, and they ignored it, and they went ahead anyway, which is to confuse merely mythical with heavily mythologized people. Now, obviously, the set that I'm looking at is heavily mythologized people, not merely mythologized people. So they're looking at the wrong set. So a lot of their data is wrong. But they do, yeah.
So sorry, I was just going to ask real quick. Can you differentiate between merely and heavily?
Yeah. So like, so for instance, I use the rank Raglan mythotype, but I only count people who score above 11, right, out of 22. And that establishes like an extreme degree of mythologization. Like these are the most mythologized people. Everybody below, the few people got like little mythical stories attached to them from this mythotype, but not so many, right? So they're like low mythologized people. They're not as heavily mythologized. And so, yeah, so I do sort of like put an actual measurable barrier to like, what is the difference between being way mythologized versus only slightly mythologized? And when you make that demarcation, you see huge differences in the likelihood of being historical. But when you have, if you look at the set of heavily mythologized people, there's super mythology, tons of mythology on them, those people usually don't exist. But when you look at people who are just merely, like just have a few mythical things thrown on them, but a lot of mundane stuff, mostly mundane stuff, those people tend to exist, right? So you can see the effect of this. There's difference between those two sets. And Jesus is in the heavily mythologized set, not the merely mythologized set. So you need to treat Jesus like the heavily mythologized people. So if they are rarely historical, Jesus is unlikely to be historical unless you've got good evidence. And so to give you an example of what happened is in my original study, I dismissed Alexander the Great, Mithridates of Pontus, and Apollonius of Tyana. And Gregor and his team have convinced me that I should have included them, that they actually fit. They are heavily mythologized. You can show it through the metrics and everything. And those are the only ones that they show that that's the case, that they're heavily mythologized, not merely mythologized. And so that does change some of the math a little. The irony is that it actually reduces the upper probability that Jesus existed. It goes from 1 in 3 to 1 in 4, but it raises, or this is the prior, I should say the prior probability, not the final probability, but the prior probability starts at like 1 in 15 at the bottom end of the margin of error. Now it's up to like 1 in 5. So they narrowed the margins of error. And I do the math and I show how that comes out. And so basically I assign these really wide tolerances originally for the prior probability. They came out with data that once you wade through all the stuff that they did that was wrong, the stuff that holds up, they just narrowed the margin right, for the prior. Now, the posterior probability, the final probability, the actual probability that Jesus existed depends on all, the effect of all the evidence that you throw at that. And so that's different. It's a different result. But it does change, because once you have the prior is a little different, the end result is a little different. So overall, they actually dropped the probability that Jesus existed from 1 and 3 to 1 and 4. And if people want to know, like, why would adding historical people to the set reduce the probability of being historical? The reason is that I was, in my original tolerances, I was already assuming that there were 4 historical people, and they found 3. So really, they just verified my prediction. I was 1 off of estimate, right? I'm just going to say there's 4. They found 3. 1 off estimate. Like, that's actually pretty accurate. And so that what happens is that my estimate was already putting 4 in. Now they're putting 3 in, but that's not 3 in addition to the 4. That's 3 of the 4. And so it has the result of actually increasing the number of people in the set, but not increasing the number of mythical people in the set, because I already had the same number on the upper margin I'm talking about, right? So the arithmetic effect is to reduce the upper margin, but to greatly increase the lower margin, which, like, some people would care about that, but most people don't care about the lower margin. They're more interested in what's the most probable that Jesus can exist. They don't really care, like, what's the least probable that Jesus can exist. And so this gets into, like, the how margins of error work and things like that. But anyway, for people who want that math, I have a video, I think MythVision has put it up, where I have like a video board where I'm doing the arithmetic and showing all of it. That might be up somewhere on MythVision, but for people who want to see the math, like, by hand, or just buy the book, because then I just explain it. So it's in there.
Yeah, we actually do have a math question that we could actually ask right now, since we're talking about the math. This comes from Limited Light, who is a mathematics teacher, professor. And so he's asking, I believe I found it in JFOS, but it was some months ago now. So could Dr. Carrier remind us of what A and B are in his particular A posteriori probability, P of A given B? I assume A is Jesus existed. If so, B is...
Yeah, so that would be, they're talking about Jesus from outer space. So I'm not sure I use the AB symbolism, but if I did, I want to make sure I'm referring to the right thing. Jesus from outer space. Here we are. Let's see if my search will work.
I think typically in that particular probability equation, it would be A being Jesus existed given this evidence. So that would be the probability, if I'm reading that right.
Yeah, so my preview won't let me search symbols in the PDF. So I can't, I don't know that I ever use mathematical symbolism in JFOS. So maybe I did. I don't know. Anyway, I can't search it to find it. So I'm just going to go on what I would assume would be the case.
Usually, Casey is confirming that you did, because she had to...
Page. Yeah. What's the page? Oh yeah, you would absolutely. You would know. You had to have read it. So what's the page number? You can't remember probably.
No.
What's the page number? Are you crazy?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So usually what I write is PH given E. And that's if I'm being brief. If I'm being, like, precise, I'll say given E and B, but not a capital B, a lower B. These are technical things that don't matter. So so let's just assume that I put PA given B. If I did, what that would refer to is A is the hypothesis. So you would have usually the hypothesis Jesus existed. And then mythicism would be the negation of the hypothesis, which is that Jesus didn't exist. And then I parameterize that in terms of what does it mean to say Jesus existed or not existed? What is the hypothesis? That's in the original study, chapters 2 and 3. I'll actually build out this very specific hypothesis. But generally it's PA would be PH. So it's the probability of the hypothesis, or the probability of historicity. And that's minimal historicity, not grandiose historicity. So it's not the Gospels are 100% true and Jesus was the Son of God. No, it's just like there was a guy and a bunch of stuff got made up about him, right? Like that's minimal historicity, like the least amount of historical that he can be and still be historical. So P the probability of the hypothesis given, so the up and down line is given, so the hypothesis given the evidence, so all the evidence. And formally, you would say like all the evidence is literally all the evidence. So it's not just the evidence pertaining to Jesus, but all human knowledge. Like literally everything we know about everything is what's called background knowledge. That also goes in there, but usually mathematicians leave that out because it's just assumed, right? Everybody just assumes that's in there, which isn't true. Which is why I usually put it in, but not in the colloquial book. I probably didn't do it there. I do it in the formal study, and I do it on purpose because mathematicians kept telling me, you can just leave that out. It's like, no, you can't, because I'm writing for people who don't know what you know, right? So I've got to put it in there so that people are aware that term is in every single, component of the equation. So the background evidence is relevant. All human knowledge is relevant to determining. So it's basically the probability of the hypothesis given the evidence, and it would be given all human knowledge, right? So the evidence and all human knowledge. So that's what PA/B means. So you assume it's Jesus existed, and the answer is yes. There was a historical man of a particular type. Anyway, if you want to know exactly, like more specifically, what do I mean by Jesus existed? That's chapter 2. Yeah, I think chapter 2 on the historicity of Jesus, the original study. I don't go into that on the obsolete paradigm because no one really challenged that aspect of it.
Yeah. Thanks for answering.
And then B,
that.
B is evidence. So that was the last part of their question: is what is B? The evidence. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I did want to get into some very specific position shifts that you highlight in the book.
Cool.
Because
yeah.
I think a lot of those are and the ones that I've chosen popular, and one that's not so known, I guess. So starting with the one that's, I guess, the least used, in my opinion, as far as my interactions with people, because my interactions with people are on the layman scale.
Yeah,
and,
right.
It's mostly like, oh, why are you even asking this question? All scholars believe this thing. But sometimes we get into very specific stuff, but it's really surface level. Now, your analysis of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8 concludes that the rulers of this age who crucified Jesus were cosmic demons and not human authorities. And I'm wondering, has there been any kind of movement on the consensus of this, or an analysis of this?
Yeah.
That would support either side.
Yeah, some pretty powerful movement, actually. Surprising movement. So one thing I do is I dig up a lot of other scholars taking my position on this, and I cite them and quote them and talk about it. But the biggest surprise to me was M. David Litwa. So like he agrees. He says, yeah, Paul's talking about demons. But what he does is he says, well, he's talking about demons, but we can assume that the Romans and the Jews were the agents of the demons, right? So we still get historicity out of it, but that's not what Paul says, right? So he's importing that into the text. And that's an example of, like, people often take things that are in the Gospels and import them into Paul. And so let's say, like, well, Paul says Jesus was betrayed. And so actually the Greek doesn't say that. That's the assumption that Paul is talking about what's a story that showed up later in the Gospels. You're importing the Gospels into Paul. But if you realize that the Gospels came after Paul, you can't do that. And so you look at, what did Paul himself say? Does he say betray? No, that isn't actually in context what he says, given the things that we know he said, the way he used the word and all that stuff. What he meant was God handed Jesus over. And I had mentioned this before on the historicity of Jesus, but I found more scholars making this very point. And some really great scholars doing really thorough, like, just sometimes when I see someone do like a thorough fucking refutation of my opponents, and they're not even aware that they're my opponents or what my position is, like, they're just on their own, like, did this. And that was Afatami Alabi. He did like this amazing study that I detail it in there, where he tackles this passage in detail, the 1 Corinthians 11, 23 to 27, where he basically takes every position I take on it. He doesn't mention historicity or anything like that, but because it doesn't matter, because obviously if the Last Supper Eucharist scene didn't happen historically, that doesn't mean Jesus didn't exist, because it just means that story was made up. It doesn't mean that Jesus was made up. So he can safely make this argument. He doesn't have to take a anti-historicity position. but he just wrecks. Like, it's just a damn, midway destruction of the opposition to me on this. And so I was just really impressed with that paper, and I was so glad to find it. And that's an example of what's happened in the last 10 years. And there are other scholars I found, Beverly Gaventa and some others, that are taking this position. So I think the trend is looking in the direction of, we're admitting, especially if you put Litwa in there, like, he's super mainstream. And so, like, if you put that in there, it's looking like the trend is going to admitting what my position was on that. Droge wrote a really interesting article that it was a chapter that I found there's just a bunch of them. So all of this happened in the last 10 years. And so, it's moved towards me. That's an example. And so that's why I got to document. I got to explain, like, this is what has happened in the last 10 years. Like, all the attempts to argue against me on that one passage are just nuked now, right? Like, so anyway, and it wasn't even nuked by me. Like, it was nuked by other people. And so, anyway, it's an example of the kind of thing where there has been movement and it has, like, been relevant. But again, that's just a plausibility argument. It just shores up the point I already made, which is it is plausible that Paul only means demons. I'm not saying that we can know for sure. What I'm saying is that you can't know that he's talking about humans, because obviously he's talking about demons. Does he mean what Litwa means, that the humans were the agents? Well, we can't tell because Paul doesn't say. So that just kind of sweeps that argument off the table, and that leaves us with no evidence either way. And so the historicist is in trouble there, but the mythicist is not in trouble there. And so anyway, that's an example of something that's moved in my direction that I think is really important, that people need to know about. Otherwise, people might not even know Alabi and Gaventa's articles and the really brilliant argumentation that shows up in them, that they thought of things that even I didn't think of, and so on. So that's important, and I think people would miss that stuff if it wasn't aggregated. And I was going to make that point also earlier to one of your earlier questions, is one of the reasons I think there's still resistance to this. And I ran into this even when I published the original study. That's why I have 48 elements across 2 chapters, is that I would have to say every scholar I interacted with didn't know at least one of those things. And some didn't know a lot of those things. And these are major scholars, right? And I realized that I got to put it in because, maybe, a reader is looking, an expert is looking at it and they know a lot of that stuff and they go, oh, why is this here? I know all this. But it's because some colleague of yours doesn't know that thing. Maybe you don't know this other thing and you know this thing, but maybe they don't know that thing that you know, but I had to put them all in order to hit everybody, because there's so much ignorance within the field of, like, these basic things. A lot of people were repeating dogmas. And even when, like, you talk to one scholar, he repeats a dogma, and you talk to another scholar and say, that's ridiculous, that's totally a dogma. And it's like, are you two talking to each other? Because, like, clearly the field is not talking to each other, right? And so, like, that's why I had to do that. And then, so it's the same thing in Obsolete Paradigm, where I had to do the same thing. I show, like, you got to know what's happened in the last 10 years, where the shifts have been, what scholars have written, because you might have been on particular, stuck on one of these dogmas where, like, that can't possibly be talking about demons, right? Like, maybe that's what you were thinking, right? Well, if that was your psychological block, we've nuked it, right? We've got, like, scholars are agreed. Like, there's a lot of scholars, more and more scholars are agreeing with me on this. And so there's many other examples like that throughout the book, of where there's positions I took that people were like, guffaw, that can't be true. And then in the last 10 years, that's where multiple scholars have published multiple peer-reviewed studies arguing the point that they said that I can't be true. I said, well, I guess the field appears to be agreeing with me on this, not with you. So there's a lot of that. And so sometimes some of these things that a particular scholar might already know and be surprised at, why are you even talking about it? It's obvious. Is like, well, it's clearly not obvious because some of your colleagues were denying it. But there's usually something in there that someone didn't know. Like they were told, they were taught, they thought a certain thing was the case, and they were sure that was the case. But then they get presented with it, like, here's where the actual experts who actually checked into that, literally every single scholar who checked the thing found that it wasn't true. Are you going to give it up, right? Like, are you going to go where the scholarship is going, or are you going to keep repeating the thing that you were told and you're sure is true, but you never actually checked to confirm was true? That's the sort of story. Like, this repeats itself so many times in conversations I've had with experts in the field, where I run into this kind of thing where they're, like, insisting something. I'm like, dude, like, none of your colleagues think that's true, and it's not just me, right? You got to show them the stuff. And anyway, so there's a lot of that in Obsolete Paradigm. And so it catches us up, I think, is important. Like what has happened. It basically updates our bibliography. And there's been a lot of great scholarship in the last 10 years that I think is interesting and people will find beneficial if they're going to be arguing. Like a lot of people who don't agree with the historicity question, like they're historicists, but they find On the Historicity of Jesus super useful because of all the data you can mine out of it to combat Christian apologetics. Because there's a lot of stuff for resurrection apologetics, it's relying on these dogmatic assumptions that really has been refuted in the field. This gives you what the positions are, where the evidence is, what the scholarship says, and so on. Obsolete paradigm stacks a whole bunch more of that on top. So like if you want to have like this sort of manual for like defeating the bad assumptions of Christian apologists, Obsolete paradigm is a vital second volume to On the Historicity of Jesus because it has a lot more of that. And so I think people will find that valuable. And because I know a lot of people have told me they found that valuable in the original book, where they said, I don't agree with you on the historicity thing, but damn, that book was super useful. Like I use it for all kinds of things in arguing with Christians. And yeah, it is, because it's super dense and has lots of data, lots of references, the bibliography, evidence, it's all really good, and it covers a lot of different things that can be applied to different arguments, not just the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah, honestly, I find that just the explanations and implementations of Bayesian reasoning and logic is invaluable. I know that you've recently said, I believe in one of your blog posts, that all rational argumentation is Bayesian in nature.
Yeah.
And I think that realization is like eye-opening as far as like, being able to, like, if you're confronted with something that is kind of foreign to you and you're having to evaluate the evidence in real time, I feel like using that as a guide to sort of come to a reasonable like likelihood of how likely that claim is. I think that's invaluable for conversations, especially now in this day and age, not just in the vertical of religious scholarship, but like in the socio-political sphere too, being able to accurately judge those things.
Yeah. And so like there's a lot of psychological resistance to what you just said, right? So you can use Bayes' theorem a lot and just never tell anyone you're doing it, right? You just don't mention numbers, don't do any equations, don't use the evil word Bayes, just do it, right? Just make the argument in that format. And they won't know that you're Bayesing them, right? And so I find that useful both in order to, I made my arguments better, so I know what I'm supposed to be looking for to fact check myself, right? If I'm gonna steel man myself, I've got to like try to refute myself as much as possible. I know what I'm supposed to look for because of Bayes' theorem. If I want to like really shore up an argument, I know what I have to look for. If I want to know whether the argument is sound or weak or strong or whatever, I know what to look for because I understand the Bayesian structure of it. And this allows me to like catch other people's bad arguments and to actually demonstrate when they're good arguments. When I find a scholar making a really good argument, I can use Bayes' theorem to explain why that is a good argument, right? And why why they presented a strong case, not a weak case. And whereas if they make a bad argument, I can show they can do the same thing. I can use Bayes' theorem to explain what's bad, what actually is bad about this argument, why is that bad, and so on. And so anyway, it's like a universal asset in that sense. To correct one thing you said, so I would say that Bayes' theorem describes all empirical arguments. Not all rational arguments, because there are a priori arguments that are deductive that don't involve probabilities. So those are trivially Bayesian, like in a sense that Bayes' theorem doesn't help you with them in any sense. You can do it because it's like probabilities of 1 and 0 and things, and so like it collapses to the same conclusion that you would get with syllogistic logic. But where Bayes' theorem really like works, like it does work for you, is when you're dealing with any argument that it's a probability where nothing is certain, absolutely certain, nothing. You're just talking about probability. You're saying it's super probable, or this is the most probable thing, or whatever. Anytime any word that relates to probability is in your argument, it's Bayesian, or it's wrong. That's just it, right? And I was very resistant to this. I was an anti-Bayesian for a while. And I was having an argument with a Bayesian over this. And there was a moment when I had that eureka moment where I realized I was wrong. I was like, holy shit, I'm wrong. Holy shit, this explains fucking everything, right? Like you get that moment, they're like, holy crap. So I've been through that. I've been through the come to Jesus moment on Bayesian reasoning, but it's that kind of, it's like, Archimedes in the bath where he's like, realizes he sees it in his head and is like, I fucking get it now. Holy shit. I didn't understand it before, but now I totally do. And that's what that happened to me. And so I try to like find ways to articulate that so that people come to that moment too, so they realize what we're doing here with this. That's kind of chapter 5, and really chapter 6 too, because chapter 6 is application, chapter 5 is explanation. And so I'm hoping that's, I'm trying to find different ways to, like, different people learn in different ways. So there's like, you can't just have the definitive explanation of Bayes' theorem. It might not work for some people, but work for other people. So that's one more attempt to try and make it work for more people. I have some other ideas in the pipe about this that might get published next year sometime. We'll see. But right now, this is like probably my most colloquial yet thorough explanation for, really, it's just 6th grade math. If you can do 6th grade math, and even if you can't do 6th grade math, you can. It's not hard to learn it. And I even explain, like, here's some books you can read. It'll get you up to speed and have fun. But if you can do 6th grade math, or if you're capable of learning 6th grade math, chapter 5 is for you. And that's all it takes to like understand the Bayesian concept and where you get what's going on here, and why it's really the fundamental description of all historical reasoning. And I think more historians should do it, which, by the way, is another thing. And this is probably the one thing that is most connected to me, is that there are a lot of scholars who read Proving History.
Are you muted?
Oh, no, there we go. It seems like Rick, he lost internet for a second. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, that wasn't on my end. My network's good, but it was
Okay.
claiming. Okay, so it
Yeah, I
says
don't
it's
know.
uploading recordings. So I think, are we live still, or?
Yeah, we're still live.
Okay, so what I'm looking at right now, it says uploading recordings. So you might not be recording my end on this right now.
I don't know. It says that it's still recording.
It says it says uploading recordings, and it says stay in the studio until your recordings are uploaded, which suggests to me that it's not actively recording my side right now, and it's trying to load my end for everything we did up to now. It's trying to send that to you.
Right.
I don't know why it's taking so long though.
Yeah, well, don't worry about it, because
Okay.
Regardless, it's recording like the entire thing, and so that'll be available for me later.
Okay.
But
yeah.
Anyway, so sorry.
Yeah.
You got interrupted.
Where did I get cut off? I don't know. Like, we just all vanished. And I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah. We were talking about Bayesian.
You know what I was talking about? Yeah, no, I was talking about the fact that one thing that's happened in the last 10 years is a lot of historians are citing me now and are advocating Bayesian reasoning and have published articles using Bayesian reasoning for their case in a lot of disparate, like, different things that are not even like similar historical questions that I'm dealing with. And I cite them all, and they're all in there in Obsolete Paradigm. So that's something where I've actually had an impact in terms of methodology. There are historians who are like enthusiastic Bayesians now because of my production on that, and that's significant. It's not a lot of historians, so it's not like sweeping the field or whatever. And the reason is what I think I explained in chapter 5, is that most humanities majors are terrified of math, especially Americans. And so, so I think there's resistance to that. And one of the things I do try to push against that and say, look, I get it. Like if you, especially if you're an American scholar, you had a shitty education in math. I'm just sorry. It's not your fault. Like we let you down, right? Like it's just the case, right? But you need to do this, right? You need it. You really do need to understand it, because if you're going to be making arguments about probability, but you don't know anything about probability theory, there's something fundamentally wrong with that, right? Like as a professional who's going to be arguing probable arguments, like you're arguing probability, you need to understand probability, and that is math. There's no way to talk about probability without understanding math, because it is fundamentally mathematical. And so I think that's why you got to push past this fear of math and realize that everything you're doing is mathematical, whether you're aware of it or not. So should you do it well or poorly? Right? It seems kind of obvious you should be doing it well. Like it's your literally your job to do probabilistic reasoning well, and so you got to do the math. And so anyway, yeah, that chapter is about that. And there have been historians who've been persuaded, and I'd like to see more get persuaded, but I think it's hard to overcome this sort of math phobia, and it's sort of like it's like Luke Skywalker clinging to the thing, saying, "No, that's impossible. It can't be math." And so
I did history, not to do math.
Yeah, no, I really get that feeling, right? Like from a lot of people. I get a different feeling outside the U.S. So I have to say, like scholars outside the U.S. tend to be better at math. Or at least less afraid of it, I guess I would say. But anyway, yeah.
So the other position shift that I was kind of wanting to address here, and that's because it's one of the more popular ones that that gets lobbied at me a lot, is the Brothers of the Lord. Now, in chapter 10, you talk about how there's actually been some major shift on this, or maybe it was always there. I'm not sure. But what's your take on that now, as far as how it's progressed since OHJ?
So that's an interesting one, because it's hard to say whether it's a shift or just people started admitting things. So let me explain. So when I had this whole argument about, it's clear Paul repeatedly talks about, if you're a baptized Christian, you become the brother of the Lord. And it's like fundamental to his soteriology. Like you're literally a son of God, and therefore you're literally the brother of Jesus, and therefore you're literally an heir to the kingdom that Jesus leads, right? So the whole theology of Christianity in Paul is built on this basic fundamental concept that we are the brothers of the Lord. Like that's fundamental. He repeats it repeatedly. He's got elaborate arguments for it. He even says Jesus is the firstborn of many brethren, like literally verbatim. So there's it's just obvious, right? Like there's just I'm astonished at scholars who claim to know what they're talking about saying, "No, it's not possible. That can't be. No, you just made that up." It's like, no, it's fucking clear as fucking day. Anyway, so that was my original study. That's what I made the case. I showed the evidence, etc. Since then, in the last 10 years, hence in Obsolete Paradigm, I cite 10 studies have come out. 10. All saying this, all elaborately arguing, like some are like whole monographs, like arguing this point, saying like, yes, Paul thought all baptized Christians were literally the brothers of the Lord. That's it, right? So the whole studies 10 times. Like, how many times do you need a peer-reviewed study to be replicated under peer review before you admit that that's the case, right? Like, I just feel like exasperated at this point, right? Like, because there's so much resistance to this concept, and there should never have been, right? But now in the last 10 years, I have fucking the whole field the entire literature on this is agreeing with me on this. Now, that doesn't mean that these studies or these scholars agree that James of Galatians 1 is not a biological brother of Jesus. It just means that the arguments that he had to be is gone, right? So they got to come up with other arguments, and so they'll usually just lean on the assumption, well, it's in the Gospels, so this must be the biological brother, I guess. I don't know. Like they don't really have good arguments for that, but they just maintain the dogma, while admitting that, yeah, actually, it could just be a Christian he's talking about. And so that's important. I think that the fact that so many studies, so many independently, these scholars came to this, published the peer review, did it, like it's solid now. Like it's just if this was an emotional barrier that was preventing you from going that one last step, that barrier has been nuked. It's right out of Dune, nuke the wall. It's been nuked, so now the sandworms can get you. I'm sorry. So that's what happened. I'm just saying that's what happened. So that's an example of the kind of thing that obsolete paradigm is full of, is these things that have happened in the last 10 years that were like, it's not like 10 scholars agree with me that James is not a biological brother. It's that 10 scholars agree with me that he could just be a baptized Christian because they were all brothers of the Lord. And so that's a significant movement in my direction. The evidence was already like slam dunk 10 years ago. So there's no like rational reason to have resisted this conclusion. But if you have an emotional reason to have resisted this conclusion, that does it in, right? Like that's done.
Yeah. Have you heard of anybody still trying to salvage that while at the same time maintaining that Christians were known as brothers of the Lord?
Well, yeah, occasionally, like there's one of the, and I talk about it in Obsolete Paradigm. So one of them says, for example, well, there's 122 references to brothers. There's something like 122. I don't remember if that's the exact number, but they say like 122 references to brothers in Paul. They're all fictive kinship relations, except the two, which are the two, right? Like 1 Corinthians 9 and Galatians 1. But he presents no argument for this. This is just the dogma. This is what everybody says. So I'm just going to say that these guys are the exception. They're the biological brothers, but they don't have an argument for that. They're just repeating the dogma. They're just assuming that's the case. And I think that's generally the case is what's happening, is that people are sticking with the dogma. They've lost contact with any of the reasons why they believed the dogma in the first place. They just assume it's true because everybody says, right? That's what everybody says. Why would I question it? Of course, the reason would be like your entire fucking study. That's why you would question it. 122 examples, and you all admit are fictive kinship, and you're making an exception for two for no reason. Like, wouldn't that argue the opposite? Like, if it's 122, maybe those two aren't exceptions. Like, odds are they should be the same, right, as all the others. And so, yeah. So anyway, there have been a few. I think, like, the only, like, attempts to get around this with, like, obscure grammatical arguments and stuff, I think, come mostly from the internet, not from any kind of print publication. And I won't name names, but there are, like, particular scholars who try to argue these things. But they're not doing it under peer review. They're just making assertions online. And these studies really cancel that, right? Like, you can, like, pump your chest on Twitter or publish 10 peer-reviewed studies by 10 independent scholars. Like, which of those should we follow, right? Like, who knows what they're talking about, right? That's what we should say. So that's the kind of thing that's happened, is this sort of resistance to these arguments is dead, basically.
Yeah, and my interactions with people, specifically scholars, on social media, I'm thinking Kip Davis as well as Dan McClellan. The feeling that I got from those interactions was just simply, there's no reason to interpret this differently, so we shouldn't. And I just, that's always come across as particularly lazy to me, because it's like, well, I get that you've always done it that way, but have you ever like considered this alternate sort of interpretation? And every single time it was like, nope, it means this one thing, and that's the only thing it can mean. And it's like,
right. Even though we have all of this evidence that it absolutely could mean something else.
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of what Chapter 10 on Obsolete Paradigm is designed to defeat, is these kinds of like irrational resistance arguments where I go through the logic. Like, there's no rational reason to take the position that you just described. Like, there's just not. So that means that it's not a rational position. It's an emotionally driven, dogmatic position, right? Like, they're trying to come up with things that sound like rational reasons, but they aren't really, right? You don't have any evidence for your position. There's tons of evidence against your position. Your position is not even inherently logical. Why, therefore, are you maintaining it? Especially since the strongest case I make is that, I say, like, at best, right, we don't know, so you can't say assertively, right? So I think the evidence is pretty strong that Paul did not ever refer to biological brothers, and I make a case, I explain the case. But even if you don't follow the logic of that, you should rationally admit that we don't know, and therefore you can't use these verses as evidence for a thing because it's a circular argument. You're presuming these two passages refer to biological brothers to argue that they refer to biological brothers and therefore Jesus existed, and that's not a rational argument because you don't actually know. Like, there's tons of evidence that it might mean something else, so you can't. And there's no evidence that it means biological brothers. Paul never refers to biological brothers. He the only time he ever does is when he distinguishes himself, when he says my brothers in the flesh, referring to his fellow Jews. So Paul knows how to describe biological brotherhood, right? And he absolutely never says that in any of the passages that we're talking about, the 1 Corinthians 9 and Galatians 1. So the one thing you could have hoped for to establish your position is gone. It's not there. So you don't know. Maybe he means biological brothers. Maybe he doesn't. And so we can't use it. And so that's the thing that I say. The other thing that I do is I point out, like in my original study, I said, fuck it, I'm going to count it as evidence for the historicity of Jesus. And on my upper margin is based on assuming that this is weak, because it's uncertain, all the uncertainties, but it's nevertheless weak evidence for historicity. So I'm even fucking agreeing with you, and I'm showing you that it doesn't change anything, right? Like it's not enough to get it over because of this nagging possibility. And so that requires the response of saying, no, I'm certain. It's like, but if you're certain, like, you should have evidence, right? There's no, what's your certainty based on? Like you said, like, well, it's just always been that way. And like, that's the worst argument possible. That can't establish certainty. Like, there's no way. That's not evidence of anything, right? You're just saying, like, well, everybody else used to think this. Yeah, they used to think a lot of things that are false. So why are you trusting that, right? Like, that's not evidence that you're right. So that it's the absolute certainty that they have to lean on. It's that they can't justify. It's not that they can't justify the possibility. I even concede the possibility. I concede it like way more than I even should. And it's in my study. It's the way I did it. But no, they're trying to maintain a level of certainty that is wildly out of proportion to any evidence that they have, which is none, right? So that's the problem that I have with that. And that's clearly to me an emotional thing. There's no rational resistance there. That is absolutely an emotional resistance. I don't know what's going on in their head, or maybe they don't even know what's going on in their head, that's sort of creating this sort of emotional insistence on a certainty that is completely unjustified. But whatever that is, that's what's driving them. It's not reason or evidence. And so it's sometimes hard to push back through that. But some people who might be in that same place will finally crumble when they see 10 independent peer-reviewed studies agreeing with me that it could mean cultic brother, because they were all the brothers of the Lord. So what are you going to do about that, right? That counts as evidence. You really got to take it into account.
No, yeah, I totally agree about that. And then since we're on that subject, I Hayes 5477 sent in a super chat asking, what is the strongest evidence that supports James the Just was the sibling of Jesus, assuming existence, and was he an actual historical person?
Yeah, so first of all, James, calling them the Just, that is a late 2nd century thing. That is not an appellation he has at any prior time. So that appellation is definitely mythical. So and it comes from wildly mythical texts. So it comes from what looks like an apocryphal Acts of James that shows up in Hegesippus and so on. I talk about all of this in my original study. But so what would be the best evidence that there was a James? James is a really common name. That there was a James who really was the biological brother of Jesus. There's no good evidence, right? So it's all terrible evidence. And there's tons of evidence against this, and I document it all on the historicity of Jesus. Like this guy is not in the book of Acts, for example. None of the Jameses that show up in Acts as leaders of the church or at all are the brother of Jesus. Once you get to the public history from Acts 2 on, no such person. And I can't imagine like the author of Acts would have any reliable contact with history and never heard of the brother of Jesus, like the biological brother of Jesus, or the family of Jesus at all. There's no family of Jesus in the public history of Acts from 2 on. In Acts 1, you get a sort of an aside reference, which is just a continuation of the gospel. But when the history, like all the history of the church, they disappear. There's no family of Jesus, no brothers, no mother, no father, nothing. So that's bad news, right? So if you're in that situation, it all looks bad. So once you accept that, like once we're going to put all that aside, we shouldn't put it all aside, but let's put it aside. What is the worst, or what is the best of the absolute worst evidence for the James being the brother of Jesus? And I would say that the fact that the Gospels list a James as a brother of Jesus, that's super terrible evidence, because the Gospels are wildly fictitious, and we know lots of mythical people had brothers named, made up for them, and so on. So it's the worst possible evidence, but it is the best of the worst, I would get, right? Like, and I say that because if you think, like, if it didn't have that, like if that wasn't in the Gospels, I think a lot of the resistance to my conclusion would be crumbling right now, right? So, because people rely on that, but their Gospel says he had a brother named James. It's like, yeah, that's probably Mark reifying the cultic brother. Right? Because Mark is using the epistles of Paul, and he's reifying the teachings of Paul as the teachings of Jesus, and so on. He's lifting material from Paul to create his narrative. Yeah, that's where he got the idea. But I think, but I think like that's like I said, it's terrible, terrible evidence. But it is the best of the worst. And there isn't really anything close to that after that.
Yeah. So I guess you would say that if we had a method for reliably discerning between historical fact and fiction in the Gospels,
right,
and that was shown to be more,
and we
than
can
likely
secure
to be
that.
historical.
That's right. Yeah, if we could secure that somehow, like, and a good example would be, for example, if First Clement, and it's important to note that I think First Clement, whether it was written by anyone named Clement doesn't matter. First Clement was written in the 60s, and several scholars, and I talk about it in Obsolete Paradigm, several scholars agree with me. Many, for a long time, have agreed that First Clement is a 60s document, not a 90s document. So, but if First Clement talked about the biological brother of Jesus, if it said the brother of Jesus in the flesh, James, remember when he got stoned or whatever? Like they tell a story, or they include him among the valiant apostles who died. So they talk about Paul getting killed. They talk about Peter getting killed. They never mention James, even though this letter should be after that. But also when they're talking about people who are authorities, they talk about you should defer to the apostles. No mention of deferring to the family of Jesus, right? What if it had been the other way around? What if First Clement, everything else the same, all else being equal, what if he has some credible reference to, well, you know, the family of Jesus, the brother of Jesus in the flesh, James, you know how he's an authority, you should listen to him, even if he died valiantly, whatever. But you shouldn't like stain his memory by overturning the elders that he selected, or, you know, like there could be something in First Clement that would be good evidence and that would stack, and so that would like, it wouldn't be like slam dunk, but it would definitely up the historicity of Jesus probability for sure. I think like if we had anything like that. The problem is that we have exactly the opposite of this, is like all the way even to Acts, which is like early 2nd century, even they don't know about a biological brother of Jesus named James having anything to do with the church. So, and then, you know, there's a lot of other things, like the grammatical construction of Galatians 1 is absolutely not saying that James was an apostle. And so then you get to the question of, well, was James the brother of the Lord an apostle? Because 1 Corinthians 15, 7 is supposed to be talking about James, the brother of the Lord, even though it doesn't say it is. But that would make him an apostle. But Galatians says he's not an apostle. Like, what, so there's a lot of problems with that. But if it had all been the other way, like it could all have been coherently, consistently arguing for a historical brother of Jesus, like an actual biological brother of Jesus, we could have had that. And this is a point that I talk about in Obsolete Paradigm, where I give examples of things that we could have had this evidence. We could have had evidence of the thing that the historicists want there to have been. But the problem is that we don't have those things, and that's what I'm pointing out, is that we don't have that. In fact, we have the opposite of that, which should be worrying, right? But it could have been the other way around. Like I could be my book could have been defending historicity, and I could be arguing the point, look, First Clement, I think it's 60s, he would know, and I think this would be like really good evidence for the historicity of Jesus. Paul says, James, the brother of the Lord in the flesh, So he's making a distinction between biological and cultic brothers. Like, we could have had all this evidence, but we don't. And that's the real problem that I think, like, I think that's the hammer that historicists don't want to fall on them. Like, they don't want to admit this. It's like, we don't have the evidence that you think you have, but you could have, and that's the problem.
Yeah. I definitely agree that it's a pretty big problem. Now, so I do want to get to some of the responses that you've received. Both you and Lataster have received. But
Yeah,
there is this one other
me more than
thing.
Lataster. They ignore him even more than me. But yeah,
which is really surprising because I read most of Lataster's book, and it was fantastic. But he rips Bart Ehrman to shreds.
yeah.
So now this point right here, it's just a quote from, I guess, Zoroastrian text.
Okay.
Zeroshit, maybe seed went to the ground. The angel Narosang received that seed and will blend it with a mother. Zoroastrian Budashin 32.8 cosmic sperm bank. Anyone? And I'm bringing this up one because it's a super chat, and I guess they were just wanting to get the cosmic sperm bank out there. But just as a quick aside, has there been any movement on that particular part of the minimal mythos hypothesis, the cosmic sperm bank, or any of that?
So movement would be the wrong word, but it's mostly being ignored. So, like, in academics, is the internet like bro cult that's all like making fun of it and stuff and being like 12-year-olds. But in academia, no, there's no one's really talking about it largely. But there are a few things that I found, and I bring this out in Obsolete Paradigm, including examples that people presented to me after OHJ was published, the original study 10 years ago. So, and Zoroastrianism as an example, not that passage in particular, but there are others that talk about the lake. There's the sacred lake that preserves the semen of the Messiah forever. And so at certain times, epochs, this virgin of particular chosen virgin would bathe in that lake, become impregnated, and give birth to the next Messiah, right? So like that was so far as we know, that was extant at the time that this is talked about. And we have examples in the Talmud of the angel of semen. There's literally the angel of night, called the angel night, N-I-G-H-T, night, who collects the semen, takes it to God, and says, predict the future of this, whoever this is going to be, and then takes it back and puts it back in. So we have examples of, sperm manipulation, sperm magic was a thing, right? Like, so we've got all these examples. And some of those I got into the second, the revised edition of On the Historicity of Jesus. And I bring them up in this one. But one thing that comes up in this one, in Obsolete Paradigm, that I found was there actually is an interesting parallel thing that is mainstream. And I didn't know this because it's like super obscure in the field. Is that it's a mainstream view that ancient Judaism had this idea that the Messiah was a son of David, like he was like the forgotten son of David. So figure Solomon is the firstborn or whatever, and he becomes the inheritor of David. But David had another son, and that son never died. They were preserved for like 1,000 years. And now they're like a beggar. I think the story is they're like a beggar at the gates of Rome or whatever like that. And they're just waiting to be called up to be the Messiah. Like, haha, I'm the Messiah. But it's funny that this actually is a proof of concept because this is another kind of sperm banking, right? And it illustrates the point that I make, and I do this in Obsolete Paradigm, where I point out that the prophecy of Nathan is falsified. Like, it is absolutely, like, it was refuted by history. The only literal way to preserve it, like, you can preserve it with a lot of like shenanigans of allegorical yada yada, try to, the way Christians try to get failed prophecies to work by like manipulating a bunch of stuff. But if you want the prophecy of Nathan to just be true, as written, as said, it needs to be the seed of David, not passed down. It has to be the seed that comes from David. That is the eternal throne guy. And of course, the prophecy was originally about Solomon, that he would sit on an eternal throne, and it didn't happen. So it's a false prophecy as written. But if you want it to be literal and true, given history, Solomon's kingdom died out, and that throne is gone. It didn't last forever, etc. The only real solution is to say that there's another son of David that never died, right? Like, but this is what they did. They did exactly this to preserve the prophecy of Nathan. Is like, yeah, a child directly from the belly of David, like it's a direct son of David, lives forever, and then he will be the Messiah, and then he will create a new throne that will last forever. Now, the only difference between that and what I'm talking about is that you're doing it with like semen, like the angel of night does, versus just keeping a whole guy alive. Now, what do you think is more ridiculous, right? Like keeping a whole man alive forever that no one knows about. Like no one knows that this guy lives forever. He's wandering around for like 1,000 years, just waiting to be called. Or God, Almighty God, who can fucking do anything because he's fucking God, just preserves this seed, just preserves it, and waits for the moment when he's going to make something out of it. And then you see the manufacturing theme in Philippians 2, where God makes a body for Jesus. What does he make it out of? I don't know. Prophecy of Nathan says that he makes it out of the seed of David. Like this makes way more sense. Like my theory makes more sense than the eternal, like the immortal son of David guy thing. But that was an actual thing. Like the ancient Jews actually did believe in this sort of immortal ancient son of David, and so so it's not like a direct, proof, but it shows like that I'm not out there. Like this is exactly the kind of thing, the crazy shit that they come up with, especially if you add like the angel of night, who's also doing weird shit with semen. And you add the Zoroastrians who are doing sperm banking, like that's what they're doing, right? So proof of concept shows that this is not ridiculous. You shouldn't be smirking at it. This isn't middle school. Like this is literally shit they believed. Like they literally believed God could do this. And so here we are.
Yeah, it always amazes me how some people act like the minimal mythicist position is just like ridiculous and magical and all this other stuff. When like the entire religion is centered around magical thinking. Like it seems like I don't understand because it's not like we're saying that like he thought like that the early Jews believed in some kind of like East Asia like religion or something, like some kind of like weird I guess Chinese legend or something like that, and that somehow factors. Like we're not saying something weird like that. Like we're using not me, but you and other scholars.
No, we have these examples, right? Yeah, we've got proof of concept. Like it's not out there. Right. So like, but I mean, you could go to they were constantly like seriously talking about like the most ridiculous things. So like the standard view of like how could there be a resurrection of everybody, of people that were eaten by sharks, right? Like so they're like, what happens? Like where's their body? How could they be resurrected? And so there are all these like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And so the rabbis, and we get this in the Talmud, and they say like, well, no. So there's the coccyx, is this bone that can't be destroyed. God made sure there's this one bone everybody has that can't be destroyed. And so that one, so like no matter how much of you gets obliterated, burned to ash, eaten by sharks, scattered around, doesn't matter. As long as that one bone survives, which it will, because God ensured that it would survive forever, that bone, no matter where it is in the world, will, when the resurrection comes, I'm not joking, this is literally what they say, that bone will roll through underground caverns. Magically, it will roll through underground caverns all the way to Jerusalem, and then your body will be just like in Ezekiel, the one bone will come up, and the God will reassemble the whole skeleton and put flesh on it, and you're risen from the dead. And that's how people the bones will roll through secret tunnels and underground to Jerusalem, and you have this magical, invincible bone that says absolutely that one bone can't be destroyed. Like this is ridiculous, and yet this is what they taught, right? And they have things like God's, where snow comes from. God has these like chambers, like these huts that he keeps all the snow in. It's like where we keep all the salt for killing the snow nowadays, but he's got it up in the sky, and he has angels to open the vaults, and that's where snow comes from. It's like this is a ridiculous thing to believe, but it's what they fucking believed, right? Like this is, so I think like there is this sort of anachronistic assumption that ancient Jewish people, ancient Christians were kind of rational like us. It's like, no, those are like nutcases that believe the most ridiculous things. And so, like, it is not implausible that they would believe yet another ridiculous thing, because they totally believe all kinds of ridiculous things. And we have an example of Galen. We have a passage that survives somewhere from Galen where he's talking about the Christians, and he's talking about, like, he doesn't believe what the Christians say, that God could reassemble a horse from ashes. Which is very interesting, because it suggests someone was going around claiming that God could do this. You could burn a horse to ash, and he could just reassemble the horse from the ash. And Galen says, nah, that's ridiculous. But he says, like, you'd have to do it like this way. Like, there's other things. Like, there's a lot. God is not that infinitely powerful, obviously, because we have, like, he gives examples, like, there's mutants, like people who are born deformed. He says, clearly, something went wrong there. God lost control of it. So God is not all powerful. Like, look, you can tell. Like, God has got clearly there's limits. There's some sort of mediating limits to what God can do. But when he's making this argument, he's referring to Christians with their idea that they can just God can assemble a horse out of ashes. But it just shows like there are like these scientific thinkers, but then there are these lunatics. That the scientific thinkers are like, these guys are lunatics. I don't know why you would believe something so ridiculous. But they did, and so that's we have tons of evidence of this, and so there's a lot of examples of that.
Yeah, I don't understand why people think that, oh, this is ridiculous. It was all ridiculous. But so a major section that I've actually been working on editing right now for the audiobook has been the chapter 3, and that we've actually got a super chat specific to that. Not Locke says, chapter 3 is cathartic. Having read the articles in response to historicity, your minimalist reorientation of the field is necessary. Thank you. And I do have to echo that. I think that the minimalist reorientation is needed, but also I'm kind of curious. Did you find there were a number of responses, if you will, using that, I guess, loosely, to OHJ? Did you find that any of them like made any points that were warranted or ended up changing your position on the minimal mythicist hypothesis? Yeah. Like you mentioned Camille Gregor earlier, just
that's the only
narrowing
one. Yeah. No, that's the only one. And honestly, like Camille Gregor is the only one who took any of it seriously. Right. So like he actually takes the maths. So like all of the arguments that I got against the Rank-Raglan prior probability construction were absurd. Like they're trying to get Jesus out of the set. No way, Jesus was the Son of God in the Gospels. Like, come on. And it's like this kind of, he didn't sit an actual literal throne, so he doesn't qualify. Like they're ridiculous arguments. Or the whole mythotype doesn't exist, and all of that stuff is ridiculous. But Camille Gregor took it seriously, and I always said like the only serious way to rebut what I've said. And I would welcome it if you can do it. That's the point. That's the point of the method, right? Is you've got to find people who fit the set that I missed, who are historical, and that's it. And you need to find a certain number of them, because I already said there were 4. I predicted 4, so you got to get more than 4, right, to get my results different. And Camille Gregor was the only one who took that seriously and tried to do that properly. And he messed up, like he got the sets wrong, etc. But he got some things right, and so I think like he had an impact because he was taking the argument seriously, and trying to come up with some way that we can change this. Does the data come out differently than I said? And the answer is slightly, yeah, it does. And so like that was like the one, like I found it respectful in terms of like taking the argument seriously. There's some like dumb things in their articles too that I think come from someone else that I think were kind of disrespectful, but Gregor's approach itself is exactly what you have to do to change any of the conclusions in this, and he's the only one who tried to do it. Everybody else tried to make it go away, right? They didn't want to do math. They didn't want to like figure any of this out or any of that. They didn't want to do the work, but he did, and so.
I don't know if you'll get this reference, but there's this meme out there that is a Pikachu meme that says, oh, Pikachu hurt itself in the confusion. And I kind of feel like that's, kind of representative of Kim McGregor's efforts there. Because it's like, oh, I'm going to take you seriously. Oh, no, shit. Wait, no, hold on. Let's go back.
Yeah.
But so, because other than Camel, I mean, there were other scholars that attempted. Like I remember actually purchasing the William Blum article on Tacitus.
Oh, yeah, right.
That was just one particular piece of evidence that you analyzed in it. That wasn't even an entire thing. But he tried to take you on, and I thought your write up on it, your response to it was phenomenal.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a section in Obsolete Paradigm about this, although it mostly focuses on a different author.
Mm-hmm.
I mention him, but I talk about someone else who's Williams. So Margaret Williams, who's a much higher level at this. So Blum is kind of like apologetical, like his approach is kind of, I don't know, like it's not what you would get from a normal historian. It's like a Christian apologist trying to force a position rather than like an objective historian. Whereas Margaret Williams doesn't really have a dog in the race. I think she's kind of stubborn and comes up with really bad arguments for her position, but she doesn't come across to me as like a Christian who's defending the faith, right? And she's the only one who's made like a detailed attempt to rebut me on this that wasn't kind of dumb like Blom's. I found Blom's argument to be like a lot of facetious, specious stuff. Whereas Williams is doing like serious scholarship, so I take her on. I mean, I'm unkind in terms of how I tear apart her argument, but I clearly spend a lot more time on her than Blom because she deserves it. She earned that. And yet all of that is a digression, and I literally call it a digression because it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. This is all about whether Tacitus actually referred to Jesus Christ, or Christ as killed by Tiberius, etc., or killed under Tiberius by Pilate. And I think that one line is accidental scribal interpolation. I don't think it was written by Tacitus. I think he was talking about the followers of Chrestus, a completely different guy who was causing trouble in Rome under Claudius, no connection to Christians. And I have a lot of good arguments for that, and Margaret Williams kind of ignores almost all the arguments and tries to replace them with a really, 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 really bad argument. Anyway, so I tackle all of that. But it is a digression because I admit that, like, well, even if it's authentic, it's useless because it's so late. Like, Tacitus is so late. All that does is prove that the gospel stories were circulating, which no one denies, right? So that doesn't help. And that's the funny thing is this is the irony, is that Margaret Williams agrees with me. She says, like, this is useless evidence for the historicity of Jesus because it could just be reflecting the Gospels or Christians quoting the Gospels, so it's not independent evidence, it's useless. So she admits it's useless, but she goes on, like, as a classicist, she wants to defend the authenticity of the text, and so she does that, and so I tackle that. I take that seriously and rebut her on that. But it doesn't matter whether she or I are correct on the authenticity of the text, because she and I both agree it has zero value for the historicity of Jesus. And that was really the position I took in the original study, so that hasn't changed any. And I think really there have been more scholars who've taken that position actually since then, both on the Tacitus passage and the Josephus passage. More scholars have come out saying that they think the Josephus passage is completely made up. So that happened as well. So, like, there's a lot of this stuff has happened in terms of where the field has gone. But there are still the Christian apologists out there pushing things. Like, Schmidt's book is super specious. Like, it's embarrassing. I don't... It's so full of kind of con jobbing that it's hard for me to take that seriously as real scholarship. But it's dressed up to look like real scholarship. I have a blog on that, so people want to see, like, Schmidt's book on trying to defend the literal exact historicity of the entire passage of the Testimonium Flavianum and Josephus. Yeah. So, and that dropped right after I'd already gone to press with OPH. So I have like a last minute footnote in OPH, but I don't have the everything else in there because it came out right after, literally like just recently, relatively this year. But anyway, for people who want to find out about that, you can see my blog, which covers it.
Yeah, and yeah, I did have somebody ask me specifically about whether or not you've been able to read Chrissy Hansen's paper on the brother of James in Josephus. Apparently, Chrissy has come to the conclusion that it's an interpolation. Have you been able to read that yet?
I haven't read it yet. I'm waiting. Really, I want to wait for it to be out so I can talk about it because it's not published yet.
But that's okay. I didn't know that. I had somebody personally message me about it. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like.
Unless it is, if someone messaged you about it, then maybe it's out yet. I don't know if it's out yet because I got an advanced look at it. I mean, it's past peer review. It's going to be published. It just takes forever for these things to be published. I've got something that passed peer review like months ago that's not going to come out until like February. Like they're super slow. So anyway, yeah, this is not a new position for her actually, and I cite. In Obsolete Paradigm, I cite her when she agrees with me and when she disagrees with me. It's all in there, like except for anything that came out like literally after I went to press with OPH. But yeah, no, she's long agreed with me on this point. Is that historicists are wrong to be relying on these external biblical references. They're useless. And she gives all the correct reasons as to why they're useless, and she's right about that. And so she's never disagreed with me on that, actually, or at least not for a long while. Maybe at some point way in the past she did, but I'm glad to see that she's publishing something specifically on the Josephus thing. It adds one more iron in the fire. There have been several other scholars. I would love to like add her next one to the list because she's not alone. There's a lot of us now. It's a growing number of people.
Yeah. And I remember starting to read her paper.
Oh, I should also mention. I should mention, like, she also gets mistreated by Schmidt, like misrepresented. She's way nicer about it than I am. Like, no, I seriously think that he's fucking lying about what she said. She wouldn't say that. She would say, "Oh, he just messed up or missed a thing I said." You know, it's like being a little extra nice. That's cool. I that's fine. Like, I respect that. But I'm gonna be fucking Huxley on this. It's like, no. There's no fucking excuse for the way he misrepresented the things she said, and tried to present an argument that refuted her that was like another straw man, right? It was just completely ignoring, like, really just like literally saying the opposite. Like, she said the opposite of what she said, and then like refuting that to try and make her look bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's that. It's the kind of way that I usually get treated, right? Is this sort of like misrepresenting what actually I said and then making me look ridiculous, right? Like, you didn't think of this thing. And I was like, I got literally 5 pages on that fucking thing. That, how can you say I missed it, quote unquote? No, I feel very much like I see the same kind of misbehavior being directed at her by Schmidt that usually is directed at me, and so I'm less charitable about this. But people, you'll see that if you look at my blog article about this, I talk about this specifically. And she's called this out, but she, like I said, she's been nicer about, like, more charitable with him about what happened. But but that's why I bring that up, because that's an example of, like, she made a good argument and he just ignored her good argument, turned it into a bad argument, refuted it, and then, to say, oh, she didn't know what she was talking about or whatever. Like, he didn't say it that way, but it just kind of creates the impression that she fucked up, but she did not. And that pisses me off. Like, as a scholar, that shit fucking pisses me off. When you're trying to, you're like, sort of like, it's like Minnesota Nice, where you're like, oh yeah, like, I'm not going to outright say you're fucking incompetent, but I'm going to like create a false narrative that makes you look incompetent. And cause I know how that's going to go. No, that's just another devious way of lying, and I find that super disingenuous and disgusting, really. So, like, that's the kind of behavior that really pisses me off from scholars like Schmidt. Usually it's Christian apologists doing this. Lying for Christ, apparently, is a popular pastime among them. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, no, anyway, it really angered me. And so, yeah, like I said, she's nicer about it than I am.
All right. So we've got Holy Space Jerks who says just send in a super sticker. Thank you so much there, Holy Space Jerks. You're awesome. And then let's see, we've got I am MathWiz7 who says tunneling bones, cosmic sperm banks. I'm starting to think that maybe the Abrahamic religions didn't spring from a rational scientific worldview.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I did a few shows for Wired. Wired magazine has a podcast. I did a few shows. Sometimes by myself, sometimes with someone else. So sometimes with Robert Price, sometimes with I think Dan Barker. I did one. Anyway, so we do these reviews of movies, and because we're scholars, we're skeptical scholars and stuff, and we know about this stuff. And I did one of the Noah one, the one with Russell Crowe, and where he's Noah. I don't know if people know. I think it's just called Noah. Maybe I'm wrong. I can't remember the name of this movie. But it got ragged on. Yeah, it got ragged on for being so weird. And it's like, that's not in the Bible. But like when I went on and I was pointing out, like, actually, yeah, you're right. Like a lot of this stuff's not in the Bible, but the people who made this film, when they constructed the script, they mined all the extra biblical apocrypha, like everything, all the Jewish commentaries and all that stuff. That stuff is real. Like everything that happens in that is fucking in ancient literature somewhere, ancient Jewish literature about the Noah story. So it comes across as super weird. It's like, yeah, but that's what they believed. Like this is actually like a reasonable depiction of like the weird ass shit they believed about this stuff. So and it's not even as weird as the documents themselves are. The documents are even weirder than the movie makes it out. But people reacted to the movie as like, that's too weird. That can't be right. It's like, well, I don't know, but it's kind of fair actually. It's like more accurate to what they were picturing when they read these stories than what you picture when you read these stories. So.
Yeah, it is really odd when you consider all the things, and that's what for me. That's actually what makes it even more ridiculous. Whenever somebody is like, how can you propose something so preposterous?
Oh, I just saw. Okay, let's hit more of these. I just saw one come up.
I'm trying to work my way down. Definitely keep sending in super chats. Really appreciate everybody sending in super chats there. I appreciate you guys so much for the super chats. So next up is it's a Rubik's who says, how did the idea of Jesus spread / arise in the ancient world? Would it be in similar to how playground rumors pre-internet spread? Thoughts?
Wow, that's weird because I actually did grow up like right before the internet, right? So like out in the 80s when that was literally where the urban legends come was by word of mouth, astonishingly, and not the internet, right? Because the internet didn't exist yet, or at least not in the sense that we understand. Well, when you say the idea of Jesus, so there's two things that can mean. So there's the celestial Jesus that Paul, for example, has revelations of, that Peter had revelations of. Where did that idea come from? I think you can trace it back to some of the fringe sects of the Dead Sea. So we have like the Qumran texts show a lot of the sort of threads that ended up in Christianity. So this is already kind of like a growing, brewing idea of the sort of celestial Messiah that would do something weird in outer space and so on, and that you would have revelations and yada yada. So that idea, I think, comes from the 1st and 2nd century of the countercultural wing of Judaism, the anti-elite segment of Judaism. And Christianity, of course, began as an anti-elite sect. But then there's the other question of where did the when did someone think like, well, let's make this guy into a Galilean preacher and tell a story, right? Or sort of allegorize the cosmic thing. And I think that's Mark. I think by all evidence we have, he came up with it. Whoever Mark was, he might not have been named Mark. We don't know. Probably not named Mark. He's probably somebody else. But he just thought to do this because that's what everybody else did, right? So like you did it for Romulus, you did it for Osiris. Like if you had this celestial god, this savior being, it was the thing to do is to make a myth about him in history. Like that was just what everybody was doing. That was what was all the fashion at the time, right? And so, it's like if everybody's hot for Shakespeare, suddenly you got to have all these like reset Shakespeare. So you get like Clueless. You get Clueless. Oh no, that's right. That's Jane Austen. So you get like Jane Austen, right? Good example. Like let's update Jane Austen. But for Shakespeare, you get like Romeo and Juliet becomes West Side Story, right? So like, it's just all the fashion to like change the historical context of a famous work and set it then, right? So it's the same concept. You've got this sort of celestial deity. Everybody else has got fake stories about their celestial deities, putting them on Earth. So we got to have that too. It's just what you do, right? It's just a way of teaching. It was kind of like the fashion at the time. And so, but then the question becomes like, well, where did they get the idea for the figure that they create Jesus into? And I talk about this in Obsolete Paradigm, where there's part of it is from the epistles of Paul. So a lot of stuff that Jesus does and says in Mark is really Paul. And Paul has no knowledge of Jesus ever being involved in those teachings. So a good example is Romans 13, where Paul's talking about how you should kowtow to the authorities because God has chosen the authorities, etc. Don't resist the government, and so on. And so that becomes a sort of coin to Caesar story. Jesus says, well, has his head on it. It belongs to Caesar. Give it to Caesar. And therefore, it's a very like give in to the government. Let the government do, like, obey the government. It's God's in charge of it kind of attitude. But telling a clever story. And that's what you were when you went through school, when you got to compositional, like graduate level school back then. This is what they would teach you, is like, tell a story illustrating this moral, right? So like that's what they did. And then also, when you tell the story, do it in the style of Homer, or do it based on this other story from Euripides or whatever. That's literally how they were trained to do it. So Jesus is built out of Romulus, he's built out of Moses, Elijah, Odysseus. So they take all these character ideas to borrow and make Jesus into the better version of them, and to communicate what their teachings were. Like, what is the gospel? What is the teachings of the gospel? What should you learn from this? The historical reality of it is irrelevant. It's the message that matters. And so that's how Jesus got invented and constructed. And then other gospel authors just ran with these ideas and expanded them and so on. So yeah, that's where the idea of Jesus arose. It wasn't really like playground rumors. It was more deliberate than that. And it was more based on the way religion worked back then. That was kind of more like Scientology today, where you have like the outward facing version of the religion, Dianetics, the book they hand you on the street, like, hey, try to lure you in to get your e-readings or whatever. And then you get further up and you're like, wait, what's all the Xenu and volcano alien shit? What's going on here? That's exactly how religion worked back then, is like you would have like the front story that was fake, but hinted at the true story. But as you you became an insider, you learn like the secret stuff. And so, then you get to Xenu, etc. And so that's the way it worked. And so it was more deliberate than mere rumors originally. And when we get to the early 2nd century, then you get all the crazy fucking shit people make up. And Lucian kind of makes fun of this, not specifically of Christians, although he was certainly aware of them. When he talks about Peregrinus. So there's this guy, Peregrinus, who's going to kill himself publicly for glory or whatever. And he used to be a Christian. Lucian talks about him. But Lucian himself starts spreading rumors of having seen him risen or whatever, and people believe it and so on. And this is Lucian's example of like how gullible people are. They believe whatever. But we get this in Papias, and I just did a blog recently on a new study of Papias about this kind of stuff. The Papias was clearly one of these gullible guys that believed, you mean the Russians opened up hell? Are you serious? NASA found the missing day from when the sun was stopped? Oh my God, that's amazing. I got to write this down. Like so we get a lot of this kind of like people making up stories and becoming ridiculous in the 2nd century. But in the 1st century, it's all much more deliberate. These myths are constructed and sold on purpose for a particular reason, and for a particular framework that was very popular back then. Anyway, that's the answer to that question.
A very thorough answer.
Sorry.
No. You're fine. I expect thorough. Just saying. Next super chat is from Jason Rollins, 6360, who says Romans 16:15 might be a biological reference to a sister. It's one of the 122 usages of brother. 2 are brotherly love, and 2 are false brothers.
Yeah, the sisters are mentioned again in 1 Corinthians 9, and I talk about this in Obsolete Paradigm, where when you do a chiastic analysis of 1 Corinthians 9, that in fact the sisters and brothers are meant to be the same. You can see that the logic of Paul is that the sister wives, or sister women, he calls them, are clearly not biological, right? They're cultic sisters. So the brothers of the Lord are also, these are sisters of the Lord and brothers of the Lord, etc. So that you actually have evidence in there that that's what Paul's talking about. So yeah, sister is just a woman who's basically become the brother, become a sister of Jesus through baptism. And that's how you become a sister. Romans 16 is a little problematic because Romans is a pastiche of other letters and it's out of order. And so 16 is one of these sort of tacked on pieces. It might have had another piece to it that we don't have. So Romans is the one where Paul talks about brothers in the flesh, meaning his fellow Jews. So you would have to rule out that he means sister as in a fellow Jew there. I'm not saying that I've done this yet. I'm just saying that you want to make sure that you've ruled that out, because there's a mix-up of the passages here, and he's already established in some of these passages he's talking about brethren being biological brethren in the flesh, being Jews. So in Romans 16, I know he refers to Jewish colleagues. He's talking about family. He doesn't mean like literal family. He means basically fellow Jews, essentially. And so, you got to rule that out if you're going to try and interpret what Romans 16:15 is doing.
Okay. Let's see. Next is Victor Engelman, who says Jesus didn't consider biological fam his real fam.
Yeah, that's in Mark.
Yeah.
And I talk about this in the original study. So I might talk about improving history. I can't remember where. I'm pretty sure I talk about it on the historicity of Jesus. But the short answer on this is that that's a story called an etiological myth, which is a myth to explain an institution later on, right? And the institution is that you are going to renounce your biological family and join the Christian family. And this is part of their missionary model, right? Is to separate people from their biological family, therefore separate them from their pagan and Jewish influences, integrate them into the new family. Hey, welcome, hugs. You're one of us now, and then you've got them, right? They're in. And so that's part. So having Jesus renounce his own family and then announcing, as he does, that the people who follow him are his real family, that's so fucking cult 101, right? Like that's literally that's the story you tell when you say, "Why should I leave my mom?" Well, Jesus said Jesus renounced his own family and said that you are his true family. Don't you want to be the true family of Jesus? Not this petty family. Even Jesus renounced his own family. You should renounce your own family and join us. Yeah, it's that, right? It's that kind of storyline, right? So it's just like preachers who tell bogus stories, and people are like, that never happened. But it's the story they want to tell in order to sell something. I mean, David Cross has a really great one where he's talking about there's a preacher on an airplane saying that, I sat next to this woman and I asked her what she's doing, and she said, like, she's serving Satan, and they're going to pray for the death of Christians or whatever. And he's like, that fucking never happened. That's bogus. But yeah, they tell these stories to communicate some message. And so yeah, the Jesus renouncing his family is one of those sort of etiological myths for why should I renounce my family and join this fake family? Is that no, this is the true family. That's your fake family. And so that's the messaging there.
Do you think that if there's would it be an overreach to say that if there's a theological reason for something existing in the Gospels, then that makes it at least unknowable to determine whether or not it's historical?
Yeah. And that's the first half of chapter 6 of Obsolete Paradigm, as I make that point. It's worse than that, because really, like if as we go pericope through pericope of any gospel, clearly made up message, so that it's clearly that's the norm, right? So like if you find a passage, you can't interpret it, you don't know what it's referring to, the odds are high that that's some sort of message. It's not a history being recorded, because that's what all the rest of the gospel is. It's the normal trend. It's the other way around in Josephus, and people say like Josephus records miracles and stuff. So yeah, but like 99% of his text is not that, right? So like the trend is historical, not miracle, whereas the trend is fantastical in the gospels. And so yeah, you should just a priori assume odds are it's some messaging going on. You need good evidence to argue the opposite. You can't start from the assumption that it's historical. It's the other way around. And so yeah, it's worse than 50-50, but even at best it's 50-50, which doesn't get you anywhere, right? Like 50-50 could go either way. It's not evidence for either side, so get rid of that. And I make that point, and I explain mathematically why that follows as well. So if people want to understand, like, this is a logically sound conclusion. It's not just some rhetoric that I'm spinning.
All right, and then I think this is the one that you kind of jumped at a little bit.
Yeah.
Mithridates 6 sent a super chat saying
Mithridates. Let's get it right.
Oh,
Mithridates
sorry.
6. Yeah.
Mithridates 6. Yeah. Schmidt's translation of truth as truisms, banalities, makes the inner Jesuit in my atheist head weep. What does that mean?
Well, I assume they're ex-Jesuit, or were schooled in a Jesuit school or whatever. Yeah, no, Jesuits were big on like learning the ancient languages and understanding their meaning and stuff. And so yeah, this is the kind of like, it's really specious, super specious argumentation. Like I just can't even get over it. Where all classicists are reading this and going, "Are you serious? Like with this? Come on, man." But no, he's snowing the audience because he's assuming his readers are mostly going to be like, run-of-the-mill Christians and not classicists who are going to immediately know that this is a ridiculous stretch, basically. So this is covered in my article on Schmidt. I have a Godfrey really nails this, I think. And so anyway, yeah, that's why I like because it made my head weep too. Similar but unrelated reasons.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to be it for the super chats for right now. If anybody has any last minute questions or anything like that for Carrier, we are going to be wrapping up. We're over time just a hair, but in any case, Rick, I'm working my way through your book. I'm a slow reader, but I definitely see a lot of value in it, especially when it comes to, I guess having those conversations with either fellow atheists or with religious people, because I feel like a lot of religious people like to use some of the extra biblical references in order to, verify that, Jesus was the Son of God and he resurrected from the dead, which, I feel like it's your book is invaluable resource for handling those kinds of things. So I definitely want everybody to check out Obsolete Paradigm on Amazon. Rick, while you kind of shill yourself up right now, talk about where they can find you, what you're doing, and all that kind of good stuff. I'm going to get a link to Obsolete Paradigm in the description right now.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have? Are you an Amazon associate? Do you have your own associate link? Or
yeah.
So people who buy through that link, he'll get the commission. Totally cool. I'm all for it. For myself, you can do the same thing. So if you go to my website and buy through a link on my website, it'll be Amazon link. And I'm an international associate now, so you can even in many foreign countries, you can go to like Amazon France or whatever, and I still get a commission on that stuff. It's very small. I see my returns every month from other countries, India, Brazil, and so on, Japan sometimes. I'm always amused when I see like, oh my God, someone in Japan bought one of my books. But anyway, whether you give the commission to John or me is totally fine. It's cool. But yeah, go to my website, richardcarrier.info. It has everything you need to know, all my other books. And for people who want to know, I've got, like, if you go to my blog, which is the front page, search, guide to my social media. So if you want to like follow me, that guide explains where to follow me, because I do different things on different social media, and so what they do and so on. is explained there. Also, if you don't know what book, if you want to look at some of my other books, I have a guide to my books where I go through all my books and say, like, if you're interested in this subject, this book's for you, or if you're interested in this subject, etc. So go look for those two things. And then the other thing is that, like, I'm really surviving right now on Patreon support. And so I really love it if people will become a regular, like, monthly subscriber on Patreon. You can set your rate. There's different options for what the goodies are. But even if you're, low end, there are some goodies. And so it explains on Patreon, and there's a link on my website. You can go to my Patreon and read what the options are. So even if you're at the bottom, like the least amount of contributing, there's still goodies there. And so you can look and see, like, what perks you get and that you can ask me for. And then if you're paying more, there's even better stuff. But yeah, I really, like, that's kind of the thing that weirdly I'm making most of my income on is long form blogging through my Patreon supporters. And I think, like, I'm a dinosaur. There's hardly anybody left doing long form blogging. And I spoke to someone recently, and they said they were very grateful that I was still doing it, because, like, it's like TikTok or Twitter. It's like micro blogging, and or there's really short, brief stuff that doesn't have, like, the in-depth analysis and so on. They're really grateful that someone is still doing, like, in-depth analyses of things in philosophy and ancient history and so on. So yeah, if you love that stuff, become a Patreon supporter. That's in there. The other way is I do online correspondence courses. It's your opportunity to ask me all the questions you have on a subject for 30 days. And so it's, through Google Groups. That's also a thing you can do. That's cheap compared to, like, the kind of classes that you see, like, other scholars offering are much more expensive. But anyway, yeah. So all those options are there. Check them out. And that's on my blog, richardcarrier.info.
Yeah, so I went to your website actually, and I got your link for Obsolete Paradigm that you have on the page there.
Yeah, that might not work if it's on your page, because if you're doing an Amazon link, Amazon knows where the link is coming from. So if you're going to do it on your site, put your Amazon link on it so that you get the commission, because then it should know that it's coming from your site, and it'll give you the commission on that.
Okay. All right.
And I'll tell people, Christmas is coming up. So this is the thing a lot of people don't realize. If you follow a link, whether to John's link to he gets a commission, or one of my link from my website, any book that I link to on my website is usually linked to my Amazon account. And you go there and you look at the book and say, I don't want to buy that. Or you put it in your account, or you put it in your checkout box, or not. It doesn't matter. That you keep looking around and you buy a bunch of other stuff, I still get the commission. So if you go there, you, like, buy a book of mine or don't, but then immediately put a bunch of stuff in your thing. It's like a bunch of gifts for people for Christmas. And then check out, like, pay out before 24 hours have passed. I'll get the commission on all the stuff you buy, even if it's like a yacht or whatever. Like, doesn't matter. It'll happen. So as long as it's Prime stuff, if it's marketplace stuff, I don't get a commission on that. But everything else, like stuff that's sold by Amazon, I actually, yeah. So it's, I understand, Amazon's evil corporation, but they will throw me some pennies or actual dollars if you buy stuff from them. So through my links. So anyway, yeah, it's a thing to keep in mind. And it helps me steer traffic to them, and they throw me some dosh in return. And there have been a few people who've done that. Like they've bought, like, a bunch of stuff, and I've seen, like, a bump in the month. I'm like, wow, that's a great commission this month. And since Christmas is coming up, it's the time to buy gifts for folks. That's the way to go. So.
Yeah, it's a Rubik's asked, where can I buy signed books?
Okay, so I rarely tour anymore because it's too expensive. It's net negative income, so I can't do it really. Unless someone hires me. So, like, if you've a rich financier or a group that can crowdfund bringing me out to do a talk or something like that. Apart from that, the other way to do it is to contact me. If you email me, it could be weeks before I even see the email. Facebook direct message or Blue Sky direct message, those get to me faster. And if you want to buy something, you can text me. So, like, I won't be annoyed that you sent me a text to my phone if you're actually doing business. And all of that you could find, if you're smart, you can figure out where my contact list page is on my website. I didn't make it easy because crazy people are lazy, and so like if you don't make it easy, they won't find it, but everybody else will. Anyways, you could find all that info of how to contact me. What it is, it's basically twice the cost. So if you say, hey, I want a signed copy of Obsolete Paradigm, I sell that for roughly $25, so it would be $50 for me to sign and put any inscription you want in it and ship it to you, like mail it, and that covers shipping and handling and everything. So it'd be like $50 for that. So if you want that, if you're willing to put $50 down just for a signed copy of something, then yeah, do that. And all my other books too, if I have them in stock. The stock is running out of all my other books, but if you want something else, or if you want several books in one load, we can come up with some price related to that. So anyway, yeah, that's really the only way to do it right now because I'm not touring normally. The next event that I have scheduled, now other things might happen between then, but right now is Rocket City. So John, do you want to like pitch that? So I will be at Rocket City whether I have a table or not. You can just walk up to me and say, hey, I want to buy a book. It'll be in my RAV in the parking lot or on a table. Depends. Well, it depends how things fall out. But either way, you can get a signed book there because I will physically be there, not as a speaker. I'll just be there as audience. And so, yeah, John can tell you more about that.
Yeah. So if you guys don't know, we've got Rocket City Reason that Casey and I are planning. We've planned it, but we're going to be hosting it here in Huntsville, Alabama. There's actually a link in the description too. I wasn't trying to overshadow your book tonight or anything.
No, it's good. I like it. It's a great conference. I'm looking forward to it. So
yeah. And we've got a lot of great activities that are going to be planned for that weekend. You can hit up the link in the description of this video if you want to get your tickets or check out our schedule and everything like that.
And it's literally a year away. So
right.
Plenty of advanced planning you can do here.
Exactly. And Rick, I mean, as long as there is an open table, you have a table. So, you don't have to worry about that. I am going to be getting a featured guest list up here soon. And so once we get some more, people confirmed that they're going to be coming, we definitely want to put in, in there, like who's going to be here from, that everybody knows. We've already got a number of people from the line that are coming, and we got Rick that's coming, as well as, some other people. So
and
we're going to be running this.
My take on that, like if you see me, feel free to come up and talk to me. I'm there. Like, I don't want to hide in the back. I'll be totally personable and we don't have to talk. So yeah, that's my plan. And I see Rubik's is talking about possibly making the trip. So yeah.
Yeah. Right after my birthday, might make the trip. It is definitely a nice place to stay here in Huntsville. It's a lot more purple, than red. So it's a really nice place to stay at. And we got a really nice hotel. We've been working with the hotel on everything, and they've been super, super helpful and super excited about it. There's Curb Stains who says, thank you both for your work. Thank you there, Curb Stains. And then
I
finally,
do appreciate it though. Yeah.
Yeah, we got Kristen who says, excellent and informative show as always. Thank you so much there, Kristen. Appreciate you. But yeah, so that's what we got. So go down in the description. I've got a link to Obsolete Paradigm as well as the audiobook for Jesus from Outer Space down below if you want to get those. Those are the two latest from Richard Carrier here. And then there's also the Rocket City Reason link if you want to go down there and check out our conference that we're holding next year. So yeah. All right, Rick. I really appreciate you dropping by and talking about your book for a bit.
It's been great.
Pick your brain on it. Yeah. And I guess I will see all you heathens later. We've got regular videos tomorrow and Friday. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. If I don't see you or talk to you or anything like that, happy Thanksgiving, Rick. And I guess I will just see all you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.